The sultry June morning of 2003 in Charleston, South Carolina, began with an unusual commotion on Hazel Street. 3 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a modest little wooden house tucked between 2 ancient live oaks. Neighbors peeked through curtains as officers in tactical gear fanned out and took positions around the property. Inside, 80-year-old Thomas Whitford was preparing his morning tea, a habit he had kept for nearly 6 decades as a former radio station technician, a quiet neighbor who was almost invisible in the community. A sharp knock sounded at exactly 7:14 a.m. Thomas Whitford, Charleston Police Department. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1945 disappearance of Evelyn Carter." The officers later described how the old man's hand trembled slightly as he set down the teapot, yet his face remained strangely calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment to return for more than half a century. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In 1945, South Carolina was entering the post-war era amid simmering changes. Soldiers returning from Europe, factories restarting after years of war production, and neighborhoods trying to regain a normal rhythm disrupted by labor shortages, economic strain, and major social shifts. In Charleston, the districts near the docks still carried the sluggish atmosphere of a city just emerging from strict wartime controls. Shipyards and warehouses were lighting up again, drawing early shift workers. Dawn was barely breaking, the damp mist from the Ashley River still clinging to the old cobblestone streets, the distant sound of ship horns mixing with the rumble of a few small delivery trucks heading to the port. Against that backdrop, Evelyn Carter, a young announcer at a local radio station, left the women's boarding house where she had rented a room for the past 2 years. Leaving for work at the crack of dawn was nothing unusual. The morning broadcast schedule required her to be out before most residents were awake. A few people in the boarding house only caught a glimpse of her hurrying down the front steps, coat draped over her arm, before she disappeared toward the road that led to the transmission station. An early shift worker recognized the familiar red Ford turn onto the route toward the station area, its headlights briefly sweeping across the row of warehouses before melting into the thin fog. Those were the last sightings of Evelyn that morning. When the clock at the radio station struck the hour for the first broadcast, her desk remained empty. The technical crew waited a few minutes, then tried calling the boarding house. No answer. The silence grew increasingly alarming. Evelyn was known for being punctual, and failing to show up without notice was completely out of character. When the morning program had to start without anyone to fill her spot, station management treated it as an internal emergency. After repeated failed attempts to reach her and no sign of her safety, they reported to the Charleston County Sheriff's Office that Evelyn Carter was missing. The report from the radio station reached the Charleston County duty desk early that morning, just as night patrol units were finishing their shift reports and the new shift was taking over. The duty officer logged the initial details. Evelyn Carter had not appeared for her scheduled shift, and all attempts to contact her had failed. The case was immediately forwarded to the Missing Persons Intake Unit for preliminary assessment. While many absences that year involved personal travel or sudden schedule changes, Evelyn's file was flagged differently because of the strict punctuality her job demanded and her history of perfect attendance. Missing her morning shift was a clear red flag. After reviewing the initial factors, the duty desk opened a missing person case with medium-high priority and notified commanders that an investigative team might need to be deployed sooner than usual. The internal report clearly stated, adult female victim, stable daily routine, no prior incidents of skipping shifts or leaving residence without notice. The urgency level was raised another notch when the station representative added that the disappearance window was extremely narrow, only a matter of hours, and that Evelyn had left her residence very early, meaning any incident along the way would be hard to spot immediately. Based on these facts, police determined the case likely involved third-party interference rather than voluntary departure, and they formed an initial investigative team tasked with quickly canvassing key areas before morning city activity erased potential evidence. A team leader was assigned to pull personnel from 3 units: patrol, crime scene investigation, and records. After a brief meeting in the command room, the group agreed on 3 priority areas for immediate deployment that morning. First, Evelyn's boarding house to confirm her departure time and interview residents. Second, the route from the boarding house to the radio station to identify any possible incident locations. And third, the area around the transmission station where her vehicle might have appeared, or where the earliest witnesses could be found. Tasks were clearly divided. The boarding house team would focus on pinning down the exact departure time and daily routine. The route team would look for traffic anomalies or early shift witnesses. The station area team would assess the surroundings for signs of interference or suspicious activity between dawn and the time the report was made. The missing person file received its new case number and was activated. As soon as the operational directive was signed, the teams received orders to leave headquarters, marking the official start of what the duty desk quickly realized could be more complicated than a simple unexplained absence. The boarding house team arrived on scene early in the morning, while the neighborhood was still quiet and most residents had not yet left home. Their mission was clear: establish the exact time Evelyn Carter left, check for any signs of outside interference, and collect statements from anyone present in the building at dawn. The women's boarding house sat on a quiet street, a 3-story building with a shared hallway and a rear exit leading to an old drying yard. Investigators immediately noted that the front door and porch area showed no signs of forced entry. The doormat was undisturbed with no dropped items or evidence of a struggle during departure. When they examined Evelyn's room with the boarding house manager's consent, they found nothing unusual. The bed was neatly made, personal items were in their usual places, and nothing appeared disturbed. The absence of struggle or break-in signs narrowed the possibility of interference at the residence itself, though it did not rule out someone approaching her the moment she stepped out the front door. After documenting the room, the team moved on to confirming the departure timeline through statements from residents on the same floor. The first useful statement came from a woman in the adjacent room who said she heard footsteps going down the stairs while she was heating water for her morning coffee. Consistent with the time the station said Evelyn needed to leave. A resident on the ground floor remembered seeing the porch light flick on briefly, then hearing the door close softly, followed by the sound of a car engine starting, matching Evelyn's habit of driving her red Ford to early shifts. The team examined the path from her room door to the front porch and found no unusual signs such as dropped items, scuff marks, or drag marks. The backyard was also searched, especially the rear exit, to determine whether the victim had deviated from her routine and used the back door, but both the manager and residents confirmed Evelyn always used the front. This was noted to eliminate the possibility she left via an unobserved exit. The team also checked the small parking area beside the boarding house. No unusual tire marks or scrape marks on the dirt suggested another vehicle had pulled right up to the door. This reinforced the assessment that if interference occurred, it happened later along the route rather than at the starting point. During interviews, an elderly resident on the top floor said he had opened his window for fresh air and recalled seeing the silhouette of a woman walking quickly across the front yard that matched Evelyn's build. He heard no one else and saw no vehicle stop nearby. That statement was treated as supporting the theory that Evelyn left normally and was not followed at that moment. Investigators interviewed 2 more residents for consistency. One did not see Evelyn, but confirmed hearing no unusual noises. The other usually woke up late and had no information. After completing the interviews, the team cross-referenced all timeline data from footsteps, the door closing, the engine sound, to the silhouette sighting, creating a sequence fully consistent with the victim's daily routine. This led to the conclusion that Evelyn left on time as usual, voluntarily, and without coercion. Conversely, the lack of conflict signs inside or outside the boarding house ruled out an attack at the residence. A summary report was prepared on site and sent to headquarters, clearly stating the preliminary findings. The departure point showed no criminal elements, no signs of break-in, no evidence the victim was in danger before leaving, and the departure time was confirmed as matching the reporting party's information. Immediately after the boarding house team finished their report and updated all timeline data, Evelyn Carter's daily commute route became the next focus of canvassing. The route survey team received a detailed description from the station manager of the path Evelyn always took from the boarding house on Meeting Street, turning onto a narrow road leading to the old industrial district, crossing a small bridge near the railroad tracks, then proceeding straight to the transmission station area. Identifying the exact route allowed the team to divide it into three main segments: the densely populated residential section near the boarding house, the transitional section through warehouses and storage buildings, and the final segment near the vacant lot before the radio station. Each segment had different characteristics regarding accessibility, visibility, and likelihood of interference, so the survey team analyzed each according to criteria: seclusion, early morning traffic levels, and presence of blind spots. In the first segment, investigators noted the residential area was relatively safe in the morning, with some homes already open to prepare goods for the local market. There were no narrow alleys convenient for blocking the road without nearby residents noticing. Still, the team interviewed an early opening grocery store owner who said he saw no unusual vehicles or strangers stopping during the relevant time window. That area was assessed as low risk and noted for deprioritization. Moving to the second segment, the route passing rows of old warehouses and storage buildings drew greater attention. Here there were narrow dirt roads, poor lighting, and very little foot or vehicle traffic at dawn, ideal conditions for approaching the victim undetected. The team flagged 4 potential ambush spots: a hidden corner between 2 abandoned warehouses, a poorly lit curve, the area near the brick wall of an old processing plant, and a low-lying patch beside the railroad tracks. Investigators examined the ground at these points for signs of sudden vehicle stops or unusual footprints, but found no clear evidence because morning traffic had already disturbed the surfaces. Nevertheless, these remained key locations for deeper follow-up due to terrain favorable to criminal interference while it was still dark. Witnesses along this segment included a mechanic who worked at a shop near the railroad tracks and arrived early to set up tools. He recalled hearing an engine running unusually slowly one morning around the time of the disappearance, but could not identify the vehicle type because lighting was still poor. That statement was logged as supporting the possibility of a vehicle following or approaching the victim on the road. Continuing to the third segment, the team reached the vacant lot area before the radio station, where morning traffic was irregular and many cargo vehicles passed through. The area was more open but still risky due to lack of oversight and easy concealment behind temporarily parked trucks. The team noted spots where trucks could idle for minutes unnoticed and checked the road surface for skid marks or abrupt U-turns. On a dirt section near the vacant lot, they found old tire tracks that could not be definitively timed to Evelyn's disappearance, but they noted the area required deeper technical examination to identify vehicle types. The team also interviewed a dock worker heading to his shift, who remembered seeing a dark-colored pickup truck parked beside the vacant lot that morning, but paid no attention because he was in a hurry. That statement was recorded because it matched scattered, earlier reports of a similar vehicle seen on multiple mornings around the time Evelyn vanished. After completing the full route survey, the team re-evaluated each segment based on both terrain and witness statements. The initial residential area was deemed low risk. The warehouse section had the highest risk due to seclusion and minimal oversight. The vacant lot area was the secondary hotspot due to the potential presence of an unknown vehicle. The survey team produced a map marking 7 locations for deeper investigation, 4 in the warehouse zone and 3 near the vacant lot, with descriptions of terrain and suspicion level for each. The report was sent to headquarters to guide the next analytical steps, establishing that if the victim was approached on her way to work, the incident most likely occurred at one of these marked points. While the command center was processing the data, The patrol unit responsible for the area near the radio station received additional information that Evelyn Carter's travel route may have ended abruptly at the vacant lot in front of the broadcast tower, so they immediately launched a sweep earlier than originally planned. As they approached the row of low-rise buildings surrounding the tower, they observed sparse morning traffic, with a few delivery vehicles coming and going from the adjacent industrial area, but no signs of disturbance or crowds gathering. While checking the side entrance leading to the antenna area, one patrol officer spotted a red car parked off to the side of the lot, not far from the radio station, a location concealed enough to avoid drawing attention from passers-by, yet still within the regular activity range of on-duty station personnel. Noticing that the color and model matched the description of the Ford that Evelyn regularly drove, the patrol team immediately approached at a safe distance, verified the license plate, and cross-checked it against the file information. After confirming a match, they reported it to the command center without delay and received orders to secure and cordon off the surrounding area to preserve any potential evidence. What stood out was that the car's lights were off, the doors were closed and locked, and there were no signs of forced entry or tampering, yet the parking spot was unusual compared to the habit of radio station employees, who typically parked near the main entrance. The space around the vehicle was wide enough for other vehicles to approach without obstruction, leading the patrol team to note that this was a location where interference could easily have occurred. Before establishing the cordon, they conducted an initial perimeter walk to determine temporary scene boundaries. The ground around the car showed a mix of old and fresh tire tracks. Some patches of grass were flattened, as if recently weighed down by movement, and several areas of fine soil appeared disturbed, though the exact timing could not yet be determined. A strip of ground along the edge of the vacant lot revealed traces of a vehicle having stopped or turned around during the previous night or early dawn. Although a direct connection could not yet be confirmed, the patrol team marked the area for further examination by specialists. They then proceeded with the lockdown procedure, setting up barrier tape to restrict access, establishing a single controlled entry point for crime scene investigators, and diverting other traffic to avoid disturbing the soil layer or any potential traces. At the same time, one team member prepared a temporary scene diagram, marking the vehicle's position and the surrounding affected zone for subsequent analysis. The cordon was extended in two directions, one toward the antenna area and the truck route, and the other along the dirt road leading into the vacant lot, to prevent any activity that could erase vehicle or footprint evidence. The patrol officers continued to examine the vehicle's exterior without touching surfaces to avoid contaminating future evidence collection. They noted that the car showed no collision damage, nothing lodged underneath, and the layer of dust on the exterior indicated it had not been driven much before being parked there. Some areas on the hood and doors had faint smudge marks, unclear whether from the driver or environmental factors, but these were documented for comparison with findings from the surrounding area. Discovering the car at this location shifted operational priorities. Instead of treating the route as a broad area requiring gradual surveying, the patrol team concluded that the incident was highly likely directly connected to the vicinity of the radio station. With this assessment, they submitted an urgent report to the command center, requesting the early arrival of the technical unit and crime scene investigation team to take over. While awaiting their arrival, the patrol continued checking the wider vacant lot for other vehicle activity that morning. A randomly questioned truck driver stated that he had seen the red car parked there when he passed by before full daylight, though he could not confirm whether anyone was inside. This statement was recorded because it aligned with the hypothesis that the vehicle had been in place since the previous night or early morning. The patrol also surveyed the footpath leading to the edge of the lot, where the ground showed unusual compression, marking it on the scene map for the specialist team. After completing preliminary observations, they reinforced the cordon boundaries, set up a logbook for entries and exits, and handed the scene over to investigators upon their arrival. The discovery of the victim's vehicle not only marked the initial approach to a scene likely directly related to Evelyn Carter's disappearance, but also shifted the investigative focus to the radio station area, where terrain and less controlled traffic offered more opportunities. while opening new lines of inquiry regarding the timing and circumstances under which the car was abandoned there. The crime scene investigation team arrived to take over the area immediately after the patrol completed the cordon and began with a standard overall survey to ensure every collection step was fully documented according to 1945 technical standards. They defined the processing area to include the ground around the vehicle, the strip of land leading to the vacant lot, the roadside where tire marks appeared, and the patches of flattened grass. The investigators photographed the entire scene before approaching individual areas, avoiding disturbance of the still intact soil surface. Close observation of the Ford revealed several personal items scattered within a narrow radius, a common style of women's shoe, a small handbag slightly open, and a few nearby items such as a hair clip, a ballpoint pen, and a small piece of fabric. Each item was sequentially numbered, placed on a temporary marker board, and photographed in place to provide a record of original positioning. The team then collected them using specialized tongs and placed them into brown paper bags to prevent contamination during transport. Ground movement traces were examined more closely. A patch of fine soil near the right front wheel showed slight skidding, not deep enough to indicate heavy force, but suggesting the vehicle may have stopped abruptly or someone shifted weight from the right side. Investigators noted a drag mark extending several feet toward the edge of the vacant lot, unclear whether it was a footprint or an object being pulled, since part of it had been over-tracked by other vehicles. Nevertheless, the team considered it significant and marked the area with wooden stakes for continued processing. Isolated shoe prints appeared on the damp ground, but the surface was not clear enough to identify sole patterns. Investigators used a measuring tape to mark distances between prints, determine direction of travel, and recorded everything on a hand-drawn scene diagram. One section indicated movement from the car toward the vacant lot, but continuity was lacking due to morning traffic mixing the soil. In addition to the scattered items, the team discovered a handkerchief lying close behind the car with a dark stained edge. Due to weak natural light, they used a handheld magnifying glass for preliminary inspection and concluded it could be blood. Following 1945 evidence handling protocol, the handkerchief was collected with tongs, placed into a protective lined paper envelope, sealed with an official sticker, and signed by the responsible investigator. All evidence details, location found, initial condition, collection time, and collector were recorded in the scene logbook in strict compliance with chain of custody requirements. The team then evaluated physical traces on the vehicle's surface. The body had a few faint smudges, but nothing clear enough to determine cause. The doors were locked with no pry marks, and the windows intact, leading them to reason that if interference occurred, it did not necessarily happen at the discovery location. However, the side panel showed faint handprint-like streaks downward, difficult to distinguish as belonging to the owner or someone else. Given 1945 technical limitations, they could only document via photographs and detailed descriptions, leaving open the possibility of later manual testing if required. In the wider vacant lot area, the team surveyed 2 additional spots with uneven soil compression. At the first, the ground was slightly depressed with a drag mark several inches long, lacking shape to identify the object. At the second, compression was deeper, possibly from someone standing or stepping heavily, but without footprint edges. These were added to the scene map as supplementary data. While checking the dirt road entrance to the lot, the team found tire tracks different from the Ford's deeper parallel grooves, indicating a heavier vehicle had passed. Timing could not be determined, but the tread pattern matched small delivery trucks common in the area. Investigators flagged the likely vehicle type for later comparison. A key procedural step was creating a detailed hand-drawn scene diagram, noting north direction, vehicle position, evidence locations, movement traces, and ground condition in each zone. This diagram served as the foundational document for all subsequent analysis, especially since 1945 lacked high-resolution photography or modern measuring equipment. After collection was complete, the team sealed all evidence according to period regulations, each item placed in an individual paper bag, sealed with special adhesive tape, stamped and signed by the collector, with full details entered into the evidence log. All items were then transferred to wooden storage boxes to protect against moisture and taken to headquarters for storage as unexamined evidence. This process ensured every piece of evidence recovered at the scene was preserved in the best possible condition in case further analysis or comparison with statements was needed later. Upon completion of collection, the investigation team prepared a summary report stating that the victim's vehicle was found in a location inconsistent with her regular workplace. Personal items were scattered around it. The ground showed signs of unusual movement, and notably, a handkerchief bore a stain suspected to be blood. These findings were immediately forwarded to the command unit for integration into the ongoing investigation, marking the scene as systematically documented and fully compliant with 1945 technical procedures. After completing the scene survey around the vehicle and collecting all evidence, the lead investigator determined that the search area had to be expanded immediately because ground traces indicated possible movement away from the vacant lot in multiple directions. A short briefing was held at the temporary command post beside the scene, where a wide area search plan was approved with the goal of covering every area potentially connected to the victim's final movements. The search radius was divided into 3 concentric zones. Zone 1 encompassed the entire vacant lot, the radio station side entrance, and the dirt road connecting to the factory buildings. Zone 2 included the strip near the railroad tracks, part of the Ashley Riverbank, and the road behind the old industrial area. Zone 3 extended to the riverside meadows, shallow marshland, and scattered abandoned warehouses. Dividing the area into 3 priority rings allowed teams to deploy efficiently without missing hard-to-reach spots. Given the terrain and the scale exceeding local police capacity, the lead investigator requested assistance from the state militia and the naval unit stationed at Charleston Naval Shipyard. The militia was assigned to land-based searching, particularly dense grass and sloped lots, while the Navy handled riverbank and muddy tidal areas. Mobilizing both forces simultaneously maximized coverage across diverse terrain, consistent with scene evidence suggesting the victim may have been removed from the vehicle area, either by land or along the water's edge. Once personnel were in place, the commander divided the search into specific terrain-based sectors to avoid overlap. Team 1 was responsible for the warehouse area and dirt roads to the factories, where concealment and vehicle access were high. Team 2 covered the railroad line and small wooden bridge area, typically deserted in the early hours. Team 3 handled the Ashley River vicinity, with its dense brush and damp meadows likely to retain traces. Team 4, staffed by Navy personnel, surveyed shallow water and tidal flats. Team 5 swept the entire edge of the vacant lot, where numerous unofficial footpaths existed. Each team received maps marked with suspect points identified from the route survey and vehicle scene, ensuring focus remained on high-probability intervention zones. Investigators instructed teams to move slowly, examine the ground, vegetation, and any unusual compression carefully. The warehouse sector was prioritized due to its concealed terrain and prior markings. Militia members advanced in a line formation at even intervals to avoid missing traces. Some sections showed trampled grass, but damp weather prevented aging the marks accurately. These spots were staked for later technical review. Along the railroad, the search focused on areas where tire tracks previously mixed with older soil marks. The drier ground here made light drag marks more visible, but still hard to source. Teams recorded every trace on their maps to link findings across sectors. At the Ashley River bank, Navy personnel used small boats to patrol the water's edge, watching for flattened vegetation or slide marks that could indicate human or vehicle approach. Some muddy sections showed long slide marks, unclear whether human or animal, but all were reported for later analysis. The vacant lot team searched footpaths into dense brush, noting many areas with mixed old and new footprints. Due to heavy disturbance, only unusually deep prints or those matching the direction from the car were logged. They also found a 2-yard stretch of heavily swept soil, lacking features to determine whether an object was dragged or grass previously cleared. the area was nonetheless flagged for analysis. After half a day, all teams submitted updated sector maps to the commander showing covered areas, suspect points, and unusual terrain features. Reviewing the composite map, the commander identified a connecting axis running from the vehicle northeast across the vacant lot and along the railroad, suggesting the perpetrator's movement likely followed this narrow corridor. Based on these data, the commander ordered expansion into 2 additional strips to check for any discarded items or evidence. Although no conclusive discovery was made, the expanded search gathered comprehensive terrain information, suspicious movement directions, and soil compressions requiring further analysis. By the time teams completed the first full sweep, the commander noted in the report that the perpetrator's operational range most likely lay within the corridor between the vacant lot and the railroad line, a conclusion drawn from the combination of terrain traces, movement patterns, and the timing of morning vehicle activity on the day of the disappearance. The investigation team, after completing the expanded search phase, began compiling statements from individuals present around the first crime scene and along Evelyn Carter's route of travel in the period before and after she was last seen. At the radio station area, 3 primary witnesses were documented: an early shift technician, a delivery truck driver, and a warehouse worker near the vacant lot. The technician stated that when he arrived at the station shortly before broadcast time, the front lot was still dark and quiet, but he heard the sound of a vehicle engine idling slowly near the side entrance before it cut off completely. This matched the time the patrol team confirmed Evelyn's Ford was parked at the scene. The truck driver reported seeing the red car while passing through the area very early, but paid no attention, assuming it belonged to station staff. Additionally, he stated that at the same time, at the far end of the vacant lot, a small dark-colored pickup truck was parked close to the edge of the dirt road, with no lights on and no visible occupant in the cab. This information was noted because it aligned with tire track data collected by the search team that did not match the victim's vehicle. The warehouse worker stated that when he opened the shop early in the morning, he heard a metallic clanging or slamming sound from behind the warehouse, not far from the vacant lot. When he briefly checked, he saw no one but noticed a patch of flattened grass. However, he was in a hurry to start work and did not report it immediately. Along the route between the motel and the radio station, the statement collection team continued working with previously identified witnesses. The owner of the early opening convenience store confirmed he saw no unfamiliar vehicles stop near the motel, but did hear an unusually fast-moving engine on the stretch of road leading to the industrial area, at a time estimated to be when Evelyn was en route to the station. A mechanic working near the rail line stated he heard a vehicle moving slowly, pausing for a few seconds, then continuing, with the sound coming from the direction of the vacant lot, but he could not identify the type of vehicle due to poor lighting and the echo off the row of warehouses. A resident living near the curve leading into the industrial zone said she heard a sound like a car door slamming hard once, followed by silence. This statement supported the hypothesis that the victim's vehicle had been parked in that area before being abandoned at the scene. When compiling the statements, investigators created a preliminary timeline based on 3 data groups: the time Evelyn left the motel, the times witnesses heard or saw vehicle movement, and the time the Ford was first spotted. The preliminary timeline was established as follows. Evelyn left the motel before dawn, consistent with all statements from residents on the same floor. An unusually fast-moving engine was heard on the road toward the industrial area shortly afterward. Near the rail line, a witness heard a vehicle moving slowly and stopping, suggesting the possibility that 2 vehicles traveled or stopped near each other on that stretch. The Ford was first seen by the truck driver while it was still dim, before the radio station noticed her absence. When all data points were combined, the route showed signs of deviation from Evelyn's daily routine, because instead of parking near the station's main entrance, the car appeared in a concealed and hard-to-observe location. The investigation team also assessed the reliability of the statements by cross-referencing the provided times with morning activity in the area. The technician arrived at the scheduled time, The truck driver followed his fixed daily route, and the warehouse worker was on the early shift, so all were deemed capable of providing accurate information. The statements along the route from the motel to the industrial area formed a repeating pattern of movement: a vehicle speeding through the residential zone, a brief vehicle stop near the rail line, and a slow-moving engine near the vacant lot. This movement pattern, when placed alongside the time Evelyn was believed to be traveling, strengthened the likelihood that the victim or her vehicle had been interfered with en route. After compiling all data, investigators established a basic timeline. The victim left the motel while it was still dark. Another vehicle was present on the route at a similar time, and both indicators led to the scene where the car was found. This timeline was entered into the report as the basis for analysis in subsequent investigation steps and helped eliminate hypotheses inconsistent with the witness-supported time markers. From the statements collected during the information consolidation phase, the investigation team began focusing on scattered reports of the repeated appearance of a black pickup truck on multiple mornings close to the time Evelyn Carter disappeared. Witnesses near the vacant lot and along the warehouse route stated they had seen a similar vehicle appearing irregularly, usually stopping briefly and leaving before full daylight. When reviewing each statement, investigators noted significant overlap between the descriptions provided by the truck driver, the warehouse worker, and a resident near the curve leading into the industrial zone. The truck driver said he saw a small dark pickup parked at the edge of the vacant lot, with no lights and no visible movement in the cab. The warehouse worker said the metallic noise he heard from behind the shop could have come from a light-duty vehicle. The resident near the curve reported seeing a black pickup truck parked in that exact spot on several consecutive days, at times matching Evelyn's usual commute. The investigation team compiled detailed descriptions from each witness to identify common characteristics of the suspect vehicle. Initial findings indicated the pickup was small to medium in size, with a short bed, dark body color described as black or dark gray, depending on early morning light, and an engine sound quieter than typical cargo trucks. One witness also described a dent on the left side, though uncertain, and the team noted this detail for comparison with technical data or local vehicle damage reports. A notable factor was the vehicle's repeated presence in the days before the disappearance. According to the resident near the industrial area, the pickup appeared on multiple mornings that week, stopping for a few minutes before leaving. This unexplained repetitive behavior led the investigation team to assess that the vehicle may have been monitoring the victim's route, or that its driver was engaged in unclear activity in the area. To strengthen the information, the team revisited several locations along the route: small repair shops, an old warehouse, and a garage near the rail line, to inquire about any vehicle matching the description. A local mechanic vaguely recalled seeing such a vehicle driving slowly along the route at dawn 2 days before Evelyn disappeared, but could not identify the driver. A night watchman at an abandoned warehouse also reported seeing the taillights of a dark vehicle during his final rounds, but distance prevented further identification. Although the statements were not entirely consistent in detail, the common points regarding color, size, and timing were sufficient for the team to conclude that this vehicle was connected to the area and time of the incident. Investigators continued compiling and cross-referencing with data from the expanded search team. Tire tracks found near the vacant lot and along the dirt road did not match the victim's Ford, but were consistent with a light pickup with moderate track width. Although the age of the tracks could not be precisely determined, the simultaneous presence of tracks and witness statements increased the likelihood of a connection between the vehicle and the scene. The investigation team used the crime scene map to mark every location where witnesses reported seeing the dark vehicle, forming a concentrated activity zone near the vacant lot, the warehouse area, and the curve leading into the industrial zone. This corridor overlapped with the area where movement traces and the victim's car location formed a travel route, indicating a high probability that this vehicle was part of the chain of events that led to the Ford being abandoned at the scene. After fully evaluating all factors, the lead investigator decided to officially designate the black pickup as a primary vehicle of interest, clearly noting its described characteristics, operational range, and appearance times. From that point, patrol units were instructed to screen all registered vehicles matching the description in the Charleston area and surrounding regions, and to check repair shop records for matching vehicles in the week before and after the victim disappeared. Adding the vehicle to the search list enabled investigation teams to focus on gathering further data about the vehicle and its driver, while opening a new line of inquiry to determine whether the vehicle was directly involved in Evelyn Carter's disappearance or merely a recurring coincidence in an area with heavy truck traffic. However, given the abnormal frequency of appearances and the clear timing overlap, the investigation team assessed it as a critical target requiring priority follow-up in the next phase. After the suspect vehicle was added to the search list, the investigation team moved to the step of screening individuals who had close contact with Evelyn Carter in the period before the disappearance, with the goal of identifying persons potentially linked to the victim's route or who appeared unusually in the crime scene area. The list was compiled from three main sources: radio station personnel records, information from motel residents, and data obtained from witnesses along the route. From the station's records, individuals who worked the same shift or adjacent shifts to Evelyn were listed for schedule verification, including the technical crew, the host of the following program, and equipment staff. The team cross-checked work hours with their statements to determine who might have interacted with Evelyn before she left home or upon nearing the station. From the motel, the team obtained the list of residents on the same floor and the floor below, focusing on individuals with early routines who might have seen or interacted with the victim in the final minutes before she left. Several residents were removed from the list because they were absent or awoke after the victim had departed. The remaining individuals had their schedules and statements recorded for comparison with the preliminary timeline. Data from witnesses along the route were also integrated. The mechanic, the convenience store owner, and residents near the warehouse area were all added to the related persons list for analysis of indirect contact, since they observed vehicle movement and morning activity. When all data were compiled, the team categorized persons of interest, POI, according to three criteria: degree of familiarity with the victim, likelihood of presence in the incident area, and degree of consistency between their statements and physical evidence collected at the scene. Many individuals on the initial list were quickly cleared because they had clear evidence of being elsewhere or no access to Evelyn's route during the relevant time. Others remained under observation but were not in the priority group because their schedules aligned with normal morning activity and showed no irregularities in their statements. Upon deeper analysis of individuals with direct contact with Evelyn in the days before the disappearance, the name Thomas Whitford began to stand out above the rest. Whitford was recorded as having visited the radio station multiple times in the previous month, primarily for technical support or work-related discussions with staff on other shifts. Several station employees confirmed that he habitually arrived late or left at odd hours, sometimes coinciding with the end or start of Evelyn's shifts. This placed him in the group likely to be present near the relevant time and place of the disappearance. When cross-referencing with statements from residents near the industrial area, the team discovered that descriptions of a middle-aged man seen standing near the vacant lot several days before Evelyn disappeared shared characteristics with Whitford. Although the witness did not directly identify him, the general description of build and clothing was sufficient for the team to flag it for further review. Data from the station also showed Whitford had worked late the evening before the disappearance, raising the possibility that he was in the area during the relevant time frame. The team entered the data points about Whitford into the relevance assessment table and found he was the only POI who simultaneously met all conditions: a close work relationship with the victim, likelihood of presence at the scene during the suspect time, and witness descriptions of unexplained presence in a high-risk marked area. These factors made Whitford the most prominent POI among those potentially directly or indirectly involved in Evelyn Carter's disappearance. His information was forwarded to the lead investigator with a recommendation to place him on the priority monitoring list and to conduct a more detailed verification of his schedule in the next phase. After identifying Thomas Whitford as the most prominent POI among those potentially involved, the investigation team moved to cross-checking his activity schedule on the night before and the early morning of Evelyn Carter's disappearance. The goal of this phase was to construct a detailed timeline based on Whitford's own statements, employment records at the radio station, and information collected from witnesses near the route and warehouse area. Investigators first reviewed the station log and noted that Whitford was present at the facility the afternoon before the disappearance to assist with equipment checks. Entry and exit times were recorded in the duty log and confirmed by the technician's statement. Whitford left the station around early evening, but the exact time was not recorded because he used the side exit sometimes taken by staff finishing late. When asked about his subsequent activities, Whitford stated that he went straight home after leaving the station and did not leave his residence until the next morning. He described spending the evening organizing documents and going to bed well before midnight. This statement was recorded as the baseline for comparison with other data. To verify, investigators canvassed the neighborhood around Whitford's home and interviewed several nearby residents. One reported seeing lights on in his house later than usual, but could not specify the time. Another resident said they did not see Whitford leave, but noted the area was quiet at night, so lack of observation was not significant. However, a witness on the same street reported hearing a vehicle engine start near dawn, contradicting Whitford's claim that he did not leave home overnight. Although the witness could not confirm it was Whitford's vehicle, the information was added to the file because it matched the time other witnesses along the route reported hearing unusual vehicle movement. When comparing Whitford's statement with witness accounts of engine noise on the road toward the warehouse area, investigators noted a significant overlap. The fast-moving vehicle sound was heard around the time Whitford claimed to still be at home. This was the first contradiction between his statement and the compiled vehicle movement pattern. Another point requiring comparison was information from the warehouse employee, who stated that on the afternoon before the disappearance, Whitford had been seen around the vacant lot asking for directions to a nearby technical facility. This contradicted Whitford's claim that he had no reason to remain near the station after hours and had not driven through the warehouse area in recent days. Investigators recorded this detail and added it to the comparison table because it matched the initial resident description of a middle-aged man near the vacant lot days earlier. Combining the data, the team constructed Whitford's self-reported timeline, left the radio station early evening, went home, remained home until morning. However, when compared to the witness timeline, one person heard an engine start near dawn, another heard a vehicle moving slowly along the warehouse route, and another heard a vehicle stop near the vacant lot. A pattern of movement emerged that was inconsistent with Whitford's stationary account. Investigators continued analyzing the possibility that Whitford was present on the route or at the scene by reviewing times he had previously appeared at the radio station in prior weeks. Duty logs showed multiple instances of him leaving at unusual hours, often coinciding with early morning shift workers reporting seeing a man leave the vacant lot area. Although there was no direct evidence that the man was Whitford, the repeated timing led the team to include this possibility in the analysis. The final comparison documented three main contradictions. First, his claim of not leaving home overnight versus a neighbor hearing an engine start near his house at dawn. Second, his claim of no presence near the vacant lot versus the warehouse employee seeing someone matching his description in the days prior. And third, the timing of his departure from the station the previous evening deviated from another radio employee's report of seeing a man of similar appearance standing near the side exit at an unidentified but consistent time. These contradictions were entered into the record with the assessment that the timeline Whitford provided did not align with external data, thereby increasing suspicion about his role in Evelyn Carter's disappearance and providing grounds for further verification steps regarding his presence during the night and early morning of the incident. The investigation team, after completing the schedule cross-verification step and noting the time discrepancies, proceeded to summon Thomas Whitford to police headquarters for his first formal interrogation, with the objective of obtaining a direct statement, checking the logical consistency between the events he described and the facts gathered from witnesses as well as the crime scene. The session was conducted according to standard 1945 procedure, beginning with recording identification details, occupation, and Whitford's connection to the radio station, before moving into questions about his timeline. Whitford stated that he went to the radio station in the afternoon to assist in checking some transmission equipment at the request of the technical department, left the station around early evening, and returned home via his usual route. He insisted that after arriving home, he did not leave the residence and spent most of the evening organizing personal documents before going to bed early. This statement was recorded in the minutes, and he was asked to provide more detail about the time frames, for example, the exact time he left the station, the time he arrived home, the time he went to sleep, and whether anyone could confirm his presence. When pressed for specifics, Whitford could not give an exact departure time from the station, claiming the station clock wasn't always accurate, and he had no independent witness to confirm he went straight home afterward, since he lived alone and did not interact with neighbors that evening. The investigators assessed the plausibility of the statement in light of independent witnesses reporting unusual vehicle activity near his home in the early morning hours. When questioned about this detail, Whitford denied starting his vehicle or leaving the house before dawn, and suggested that the neighborhood sometimes had delivery trucks passing through at early hours, which might have confused the witnesses. This explanation was noted but flagged in the file as unverifiable, as no data from the residential area indicated regular delivery truck activity at that time. When the investigators shifted to questions about Whitford's presence near the warehouse and the vacant lot in the days leading up to the disappearance, he admitted he had passed through the area once or twice to ask about the location of a repair shop for electronic equipment, but denied stopping or observing the area as described by witnesses. The investigators noted that this was the first time he acknowledged being in the corridor of the vacant lot, contradicting his earlier statement that he had not passed through the area during the relevant period. This change was listed as a behavioral inconsistency and entered into the interrogation record. When asked to explain why he had not mentioned this information from the beginning, Whitford said he didn't remember clearly and considered passing through the area a few days before the incident irrelevant. The investigators continued with questions about his relationship with Evelyn Carter, and Whitford replied that he knew her through radio station activities and occasionally discussed work matters, but had no personal relationship. Several station employees had described him as frequently staying late and sometimes trying to talk to Evelyn more than necessary, but Whitford rejected the idea that he had any special interest in her. When asked to explain why he was present at the station during unusual hours, he said it was the nature of the job and that he often took equipment home to repair privately. This statement was recorded, however. The technical department later confirmed there had been no repair requests at the times he was reportedly seen near the vacant lot, according to witness statements. This created a significant discrepancy between his statement and baseline data. The investigators continued testing timeline logic by presenting Whitford with a preliminary timeline they had constructed, which included vehicle sounds heard along the route leading to the warehouse, a vehicle stopping near the vacant lot, and witness statements of a dark-colored vehicle parked nearby in the early morning hours. When asked if he could explain this coincidence, Whitford replied that he had nothing to do with it and that anyone in the area could have been driving that vehicle. However, when the investigators asked whether he knew of any radio station or industrial zone employees who drove a dark pickup truck, he answered no, but admitted I didn't pay much attention to colleagues' vehicles. This statement did not clarify his role, but was recorded as information requiring further cross-checking. During the interrogation, the investigators noted multiple points of vagueness in Whitford's account, particularly the period from when he left the station until he claimed to be home. The absence of witnesses or traces confirming that period made his statement difficult to verify. When asked why he could not remember times more clearly, Whitford said it was just an ordinary day, a psychologically reasonable explanation, but insufficient to eliminate suspicion in the context of the disappearance. At the end of the session, the investigators summarized the data and recorded in the file that Whitford's statement had three characteristics: lack of detail regarding time, contradictions with independent witnesses, and changes from his initial statements about being near the warehouse area. All these points were entered into the minutes and classified as inconsistencies requiring verification, providing grounds to continue the investigation and assess Whitford's degree of involvement in Evelyn Carter's disappearance. After completing the first interrogation of Whitford and noting the unresolved inconsistencies, the investigation team shifted to broaden the scope of evaluation to other individuals who might be connected, in order to avoid focusing too early on a single person of interest. While reviewing personnel files and security reports around the Charleston industrial area, the name Raymond Booker appeared on the list of individuals who had been present at the warehouse and vacant lot during the week before the disappearance. Booker was a seasonal laborer who performed loading, unloading, and minor repairs at various warehouses in the area. His background showed a few minor offenses related to public disturbances and arguments with coworkers, but no serious criminal record. Nevertheless, the investigators noted that Booker had a flexible work schedule and often appeared at irregular hours, making him someone who could move around the area in the early morning without drawing attention. To determine Booker's exact whereabouts on the night and morning of the disappearance, the team contacted managers at several warehouses where he had worked. One manager confirmed Booker was at the warehouse the previous afternoon to move cargo, but could not verify when he left because employee timekeeping was not strict. A coworker on the same shift stated that Booker left the area quite late, possibly around the time nearby facilities turned off their lights, but was unsure because they did not leave together. This statement partially matched the area timeline, as several witnesses had heard metal clanging or vehicle movement near the warehouse that night, though the source of the sounds could not yet be identified. The investigators then checked Booker's residential address against reports from residents living along the route between the warehouse and the railroad tracks. One resident recalled seeing a tall man walking quickly along the roadside in the early morning hours, wearing a heavy jacket which matched Booker's build, but the light was poor and they could not be certain of the identity. Although the statement lacked precision, the team recorded it because the clothing description matched what Booker typically wore for outdoor work. Next, the team examined Booker's behavior in the week prior to the incident. Several warehouse employees stated that Booker appeared tense and often stepped outside his work area to look toward the vacant lot for no apparent reason. One even reported that 2 days before the disappearance, Booker argued with a coworker over borrowed tools that were not returned, indicating a short temper and potential loss of control in certain situations. However, these incidents had no direct connection to the victim, so the investigators classified them as behavioral factors rather than incriminating evidence. To fully assess Booker's location during the critical time, the investigators spoke with people living near his residence. One neighbor stated they had seen Booker leave home very early in the morning on several consecutive days prior to the incident, but did not know where he went. When cross-referenced with timelines, Booker's patterns of appearance coincided with times when witnesses saw or heard someone moving near the warehouse and vacant lot area. This led the investigation team to regard Booker as a person of interest with potential relevance, especially since his nighttime movements were generally unrecorded, creating unverifiable gaps in his timeline. When Booker was invited in to provide a voluntary statement, he admitted being in the industrial area late in the afternoon, but denied being near the vacant lot in the early morning hours. However, when presented with witness accounts of footsteps and a figure seen near the warehouse road, Booker explained that many workers passed through the area and there could have been confusion. Although his statement did not contain the obvious contradictions seen with Whitford, Booker could not produce a witness to confirm he was home in the early morning, making his account one-sided and not yet exculpatory. After compiling all the data, the investigation team placed Booker in the category of second suspect based on three groups of factors: his flexible work schedule that allowed presence at the warehouse area at any hour, witness descriptions of a man with matching characteristics seen near the crime scene in the days before the disappearance, and several signs of unusual behavior suggesting possible activity outside his normal duties. Adding Booker as the second suspect was recorded in the file with the note that his level of suspicion required further evaluation through detailed timeline verification and physical evidence cross-checking, while placing him under surveillance alongside Whitford to ensure no investigative avenues were overlooked. Following the decision to designate Raymond Booker as the second suspect, the investigation team conducted his first formal interrogation to determine his degree of involvement during the period of Evelyn Carter's disappearance. Booker was brought to police headquarters as a person providing information, but the session was fully documented and followed standard interrogation procedure. At the outset, the investigators asked Booker to describe in detail his activities from the afternoon before the disappearance through the early morning after. Booker stated he worked a loading shift at a warehouse in the Charleston industrial zone until late afternoon, then left when the manager ended the shift. He said he walked back to his temporary lodging, ate a quick dinner, and rested in his room. When asked for specific times, Booker said he did not remember exactly when he got home because the shift ran long and he did not habitually check the clock. This statement was recorded but immediately created a timeline gap due to the lack of clear markers. The investigators asked whether he could provide any witness to confirm his presence at his residence that night. Booker replied that the lodging was quiet and people usually shut their doors early, so he did not interact with anyone. When asked what he did between arriving home and going to sleep, Booker described resting, tidying his tools, and preparing for the next workday, but provided no objectively verifiable details. This was marked in the minutes as difficult to verify, similar to Whitford's case, though the degree of contradiction was not yet as pronounced. When asked whether he had left his lodging in the early morning hours, Booker denied it, saying he slept straight through until nearly time to leave for work. However, the investigators cross-referenced this with a resident near Booker's lodging, who reported seeing a tall man in a heavy jacket walking very early on several mornings, possibly including the morning of the disappearance. Booker suggested that because his work hours were irregular, the witness might have seen him on a different day and mixed up the dates. The explanation was noted, but lacked corroboration. Next, the investigators asked about Booker's presence near the warehouse and vacant lot in the previous week, as one witness had described someone standing at the edge, looking into the lot. Booker acknowledged he might have stopped nearby while walking home, but denied watching anyone or having any other purpose. When asked why he would stand in such a sparsely traveled area, Booker explained he sometimes paused to smoke, a habit coworkers confirmed he had. Nevertheless, this habit placed him within timeframes that overlapped with recorded suspicious activity. The investigators continued probing timeline data by asking Booker whether he had heard vehicle sounds, metal clanging, or any unusual activity the night before the disappearance, since witnesses near the warehouse reported similar noises. Booker said he did not know because he was in his room and didn't pay attention to things outside. This answer did not directly contradict witness statements, but also did not help establish his location. When the investigators moved to testing his alibi, they asked Booker to describe the state of his lodging the next morning and whether anyone could confirm he had slept there until leaving for work. Booker admitted no one saw him that morning because he left early, yet maintained he had not gone out in the pre-dawn hours. This left his alibi unreliable due to the absence of witnesses, lack of specific times, and unfavorable coincidence with reports of a man appearing early near the warehouse road. The investigators asked Booker about the means of transportation he typically used. Booker stated he did not own a vehicle and walked most places. This information was recorded. If he walked, his presence along the main road was plausible, but it also made rapid access to the crime scene more difficult, unless he happened to be present at the exact moment of Evelyn Carter's disappearance. When comparing Booker's statement to the overall timeline, the investigation team noted several significant points. First, the man seen in the morning near the road of the suspect vehicle had a build similar to Booker's. Second, his habit of being at the warehouse area at odd hours matched witness descriptions of someone standing near the vacant lot days before the disappearance. Third, the lack of a clear alibi allowed the possibility of placing him in the suspect area. However, compared to Whitford, Booker's contradictions were less obvious, and there was no direct link to the victim's vehicle or the precise moment of disappearance. The time period Booker described could still fit someone simply passing through the area with no involvement. The first interrogation concluded that Booker's statement was insufficient to remove him from the suspect list, but also did not yet provide a pivotal incriminating element. The investigation unit recorded in the file that Booker's behavior and location during the incident were sufficient to keep him on the suspect list, but further verification of timing and any actual connection to the victim was required. Thus, Raymond Booker was officially classified as the second suspect, with a moderate level of suspicion, necessitating continued monitoring and cross-referencing with other case evidence. After sequentially interrogating Whitford and Booker, but failing to obtain clues sufficient to narrow down the suspects, the investigation team decided to expand the search to isolated areas beyond the original wasteland perimeter in order to determine whether any traces related to the victim's final movements or the suspect vehicle existed. This phase was launched after terrain map analysis revealed numerous old, rarely visited structures that had not yet been thoroughly checked, including a long-abandoned corn silo, a shallow swamp extending eastward, and several disused warehouses scattered throughout the Charleston industrial zone. The search team divided into 3 units to systematically survey each area, starting with the old silo because of its proximity to the dirt road leading from the wasteland and its potential as a temporary stopping point if the perpetrator wished to conceal movement. Upon arrival, the team noted the silo was tall but severely deteriorated, with a hanging, unstable door and surrounding ground covered in multiple layers of overlapping footprints from local residents and past workers. Inside, the silo was empty except for a few broken wooden blocks and rusted metal scraps. No physical traces or items that could be linked to the victim were found. Several patches of soil inside the silo were probed with rods to check for unusual disturbance, but the results showed long compacted earth with no signs of recent digging. The team marked the area as no findings and moved to the next location. The shallow swamp was considered the most difficult area to access due to dense vegetation, soft ground, and numerous unofficial paths created by hunters and locals. A Navy unit assisted with the shoreline survey, as their experience moving through wet terrain would enable more effective checking. The team recorded many small slide marks in the mud, but due to scattered rain in previous days, neither their age nor any connection to the case could be determined. Some grass patches at the water's edge were pressed down, but when cross-referenced with wind direction and water flow, investigators concluded these marks were likely caused by animals. Deeper checks in the mudflats also revealed no personal items, bloodstains, or distinct drag marks. The team concluded the swamp provided no useful traces and moved on to the abandoned warehouses. The vacant warehouses in the industrial area received the most attention because their enclosed structures could easily serve as temporary hiding places for evidence or short-term shelter for the perpetrator. During the survey of the first warehouse, the team discovered the front door was damaged and the rear door slightly ajar, but thick dust inside indicated little recent traffic. The floor was covered in fine dust with no fresh footprints, only a few faded old shoe prints. No recently dropped items or signs of disturbance were present. The second warehouse showed similar conditions. All traces were old, empty broken wooden crates, and nothing related to the victim. The team also checked outside the warehouses, especially soft soil areas that could retain footprints, but only small animal tracks were found. The third warehouse, located deeper in the industrial zone, was considered higher potential because it was not far from where the victim's vehicle was discovered. During the survey, the team noted several scratch marks on the wooden walls that appeared newer than others, but there was no blood or items nearby. The scratches also did not correlate with height or force sufficient to link them to an assault. They were most likely caused by vagrants or passing workers. Some wooden planks were displaced from their original positions, but without accompanying fresh footprints on the ground, the team assessed these traces as having no investigative value. After completing the warehouse inspections, the investigation team compiled their notes and confirmed that none of the 3 surveyed locations yielded significant clues related to Evelyn Carter or the suspect vehicle. Any recovered objects, if any, were only unrelated old metal or wood fragments with no forensic value. A second field report was prepared, stating that the 3 isolated areas, the old silo, the eastern swamp, and the 3 abandoned warehouses, had been comprehensively searched but produced no traces, evidence, or physical proof capable of narrowing the investigation. This led the command team to assess that if the perpetrator had passed through these areas, he left no direct evidence, or he chose a different, less noticeable route. The expanded search concluded in a state of no significant findings, forcing the investigators to reanalyze previously collected data to redefine focus for subsequent steps. After completing the expanded searches without obtaining new physical evidence, the investigation team transferred all evidence collected from the primary scene, including the handkerchief with dark stains, scattered personal items, soil traces on shoes, wasteland soil samples, and small debris near the vehicle, to the Charleston Forensic Department in accordance with 1945 procedures. Due to the technological limitations of the era, analysis relied primarily on direct visual observation, basic chemical testing, and physical shape comparison. There was no DNA technology or modern trace evidence analysis. The handkerchief was regarded as the most important item because the dark stain was likely human blood. The forensic lab used the preliminary Castle-Meyer test to determine the organic nature of the stain. The result was positive, indicating it was most likely blood, but blood type could not be determined due to the small sample size and oxidation. The lab attempted to estimate the stain's age by comparing color and adhesion to various simulations, but could only conclude it may have occurred 1236 hours before collection, too broad a window to accurately cross-reference with the case timeline. No clear fingerprints were visible on the handkerchief because the fabric surface was unsuitable for retaining ridge detail. Regarding the scattered items, women's shoes, hair clip, and small handbag, forensics noted no clear signs of struggle according to 1945 visual standards. The soil on the shoes matched the wasteland samples, confirming the shoes were dropped at the scene rather than moved from elsewhere. However, these items provided no information about the last person in contact because there were no tools to separate bodily or cellular traces. Soil traces collected around the vehicle were compared under a magnifying glass with soil on the Ford's undercarriage to determine whether the car had been driven outside the area. Results showed high similarity, but were insufficient to confirm the vehicle had stopped elsewhere beforehand. Compacted soil streaks and extended marks were photographed and manually analyzed, but because the area had been disturbed by vehicles and passers-by after the car was found, original shapes or clear directions of movement could not be reconstructed. When examining tire tracks, forensics noted the marks did not belong to the victim's Ford, but also did not clearly match any specific pickup model. In 1945, tire pattern comparison relied on manufacturer specifications and samples kept at local garages. No garage reported repairing or replacing tires on a vehicle matching the description in the days surrounding the incident. Consequently, this evidence could not be directly linked to any suspect, including Whitford, who owned no vehicle, or Booker, who stated he had no motorized transportation. The metal fragments showed no distinctive features and were most likely remnants of industrial activity in the area. No fingerprints were found on the Ford surfaces, possibly due to weather conditions and unintentional handling by personnel before the scene was secured. The forensic department noted that with available equipment, they lacked the ability to distinguish old versus new traces or analyze trace elements. The forensic conclusions returned to the investigation team contained three main points. First, no evidence could be directly linked to a specific individual using 1945 techniques. Second, there were no sufficiently strong indicators to prove the presence of Whitford or Booker at the abandoned vehicle scene. And third, no physical evidence proved an assault occurred at the scene, apart from the blood-stained handkerchief, whose owner and exact timing could not be determined. With these results, the lead investigator had to acknowledge there was insufficient physical evidence to prosecute any suspect. The consolidated report classified the case status as lacking forensic conclusion, weakening the possibility of continuing the investigation through direct charges and forcing the team to rely more heavily on witness statements, movement logic, and behavioral analysis in an era when forensic technology could not meet the demands of clear proof. After receiving the forensic results and reviewing all data collected in the initial phase, the investigation team compiled all information to assess case progress and determine whether any viable investigative avenues remained that could be pursued with Charleston's 1945 resources. The consolidated report was based on four main data groups: physical evidence from the victim's vehicle scene, witness statements from multiple areas, behavioral and schedule analysis of suspects Whitford and Booker, and results from expanded searches of potentially related locations. The team confirmed that existing physical evidence consisted of an untraceable blood-stained handkerchief, victim's scattered items showing no clear assault signs, tire tracks not matching any specific vehicle, and ground traces too unclear to reconstruct movement. This led to the conclusion that physical evidence was minimal and insufficient to form a basis for charges. Regarding witness statements, although information was gathered about a black pickup seen on multiple days and unusual engine sounds at times matching the case timeline, no witness directly saw interaction between that vehicle and the victim. All statements were indirect, sometimes vague and difficult to verify due to poor lighting conditions at the time of observation. Witnesses along the route provided varying descriptions, but no data formed a complete chain strong enough to identify the perpetrator. When evaluating the two suspects, the team noted both had suspicious elements but lacked sufficiently strong data to reach a conclusion. For Whitford, timeline contradictions and his presence near the warehouse area raised suspicion, but no physical evidence linked him to the scene. For Booker, his unusual hour appearance and proximity to the wasteland were noted, yet a weak alibi did not equate to guilt, and no statement or evidence placed him in direct contact with the victim. The expanded searches of the old silo, swamp, and abandoned warehouses yielded no significant discoveries. There were no notable recent disturbances, no related evidence, and no indication the victim had been taken to these locations. This weakened the hypothesis that the perpetrator hid or moved evidence there. When all data were compiled, the team created a cross-reference matrix of statements, physical evidence, suspect locations, and times of the suspect vehicle's appearance. The results showed no linkage reaching the certainty required to sustain active criminal investigation under period standards. All event chains remained at the level of possible, but did not cross the threshold of provable. The Case Resolution Assessment Report clearly stated the incident lacked direct evidence, confirming witnesses, useful clues from expanded searches, and modern forensic tools to fill those gaps. In the recommendation section, the lead investigator stated the case had reached the maximum exploitation possible with current procedures and technology. Continuing active investigation without new leads was deemed inefficient and resource-intensive. Therefore, the recommendation was to temporarily close the file and change the case status to unsolved, with the note that the file could be reopened if new witnesses, evidence, or technical capabilities emerged in the future. This decision marked the end of the initial investigation phase, while simultaneously highlighting the major limitations of 1945 investigative work when faced with an evidence-scarce case involving complex movement patterns. After the recommendation to suspend the investigation was approved, Evelyn Carter's missing person case file was officially changed to unsolved status and archived in the Charleston Police Department's records room according to 1945 procedures. The file, containing interrogation transcripts, scene diagrams, photographs, compiled witness statements, and forensic reports, was bound in thick cardboard, labeled with the case number and storage date, and placed in a metal cabinet alongside other pending cases. The investigation team handed over all accompanying physical evidence, including the blood-stained handkerchief, women's shoes, hair clip, handbag, soil samples, and debris collected at the scene, to the Evidence Management Unit, where items were given a final wax and paper seal per period standards. Due to limited preservation technology, evidence was stored in wooden or cardboard boxes on shelves in an uncontrolled temperature and humidity storage room. Upon receipt, management noted in the logbook that the items would require periodic checking, but in actual 1945 practice, such checks were largely formal and mainly confirmed the items remained in place. Over time, the storage environment began affecting evidence quality. The blood-stained handkerchief, exposed to air and natural humidity, showed increased oxidation, fading the color and making future analysis far more difficult. The women's shoes developed cracks in the leather, and storage room dust obscured small surface traces. The fabric handbag began mild rotting at the edges, and its inner lining yellowed with age. Soil samples dried out and became looser than their original state, no longer accurately reflecting scene conditions. Metal fragments rusted further in the damp storage, losing surface details that might have been useful for later comparison. Meanwhile, the file folder itself warped at the edges, and its ink faded over the years. Each time an officer retrieved the file for cross-reference with other cases, the paper sustained minor additional wear. According to period regulations, unsolved cases were placed in the rearmost cabinet drawers and only re-examined if new leads appeared or a higher authority requested review. Since no progress occurred after closure, the case gradually became a true cold case status. No new witnesses, no new evidence, and no forensic techniques powerful enough to recover data from the aged traces. Over the years, the evidence storage room was relocated once, causing Evelyn Carter's evidence boxes to be moved from upper to lower shelves. During that move, some documents loosened at the edges and items shifted inside their boxes, though the main seals remained intact. These minor changes were recorded in the inventory log, but triggered no additional investigation. The once prominently placed 1945 case file was gradually pushed deeper by newer cases, eventually resting far back in a dust-covered metal drawer, symbolizing the shift from an urgent investigation to one forgotten by time. Like many unsolved cases of the 1940s, the combination of evidence degradation and the era's storage limitations made future reconstruction increasingly difficult with each passing year, turning Evelyn Carter's file into a genuine cold case in the Charleston archives. From 1950 to the mid-1960s, as the Charleston Police Department underwent numerous personnel and structural changes, several new detectives were assigned to review backlogged case files, including the disappearance of Evelyn Carter. The re-examination of the file was not prompted by any new leads, but by an effort to standardize archived documents and assess the possibility of reopening unsolved cases under the state's new criteria. Evelyn Carter's file was pulled from a metal cabinet. Its folder was slightly warped and faded with age, a thick layer of dust on the surface showing it had not been touched in years. The young detective in charge of the first review began reading through the entire record, the Whitford interrogation transcripts, notes on Booker, the limited 1945 forensic report, crime scene maps, search results from multiple areas, and the inventory of now degraded physical evidence. As he examined the chain of events, he noted that although the original investigation structure was thorough by the standards of its time, every lead ended at the level of speculation, lacking charging elements or solid physical proof. The absence of modern forensic technology meant most conclusions rested heavily on witness statements taken in poor lighting and at unverifiable times. The detective also paid attention to the repeated mentions of a black pickup truck, a clue that appeared multiple times in the file but had never been followed up because, in that era, Charleston did not maintain vehicle registration records by color or truck bed characteristics. He noted that in the 1950s, cross-referencing tire type or repeat vehicle models with local garages could have been done more effectively than in 1945, but when he checked, the file no longer contained specific tire tread data, the original sketch had faded, and the soil samples adhering to tires had deteriorated beyond usefulness. The detective continued examining the Whitford materials, noting that the timeline discrepancy remained the only point of suspicion, but nothing new existed to verify it. By this time, Whitford had transferred to another facility inland in South Carolina and had never been investigated in any other case. No criminal record, no new statements from former co-workers, no additional witnesses. While reviewing the Booker-related transcripts, the young detective observed that suspicion toward Booker stemmed largely from vague behavior and his presence near the warehouse area, but no evidence linked him to the victim. In 1954, Booker had been arrested for a minor bar fight, but nothing indicated organized violence or involvement in disappearances. When re-examining statements from residents near the warehouse and industrial zone, the detective found every description vague, usually based on fleeting observations in near darkness, making identification of the man seen near the scene effectively impossible. He noted that if someone driving a black pickup had been following the victim's route, that person was never identified, and nothing in the file proved the truck belonged to Whitford Booker or any industrial zone worker. Upon inspecting the stored physical evidence, the detective found severe degradation. The handkerchief had faded so much that the boundaries of the stained area were barely discernible. The shoes and hair clip were covered in thick dust. The purse had slight tears along the edges. The soil samples had crumbled and lost any projective structure. All of this made reanalysis using 1950s, 1960s techniques highly unlikely. The post-war forensic lab had seen minor improvements, but not enough to overcome nearly 2 decades of deterioration. The review report stated, "No item of evidence remains viable for examination. No comparison samples exist." The detective also explored the possibility of reopening the case from a behavioral crime perspective. He searched similar incidents in the region from 1945 to 1965 for repeating patterns, but record-keeping of that era was fragmented and lacked inter-county connectivity, rendering meaningful comparison almost impossible. Numerous scattered disappearances bore no similar descriptions and could not be treated as linked. In the final report of this first review phase, the detective wrote clearly, "No new evidence, no new statements, no evidence suitable for examination, no suspect that can be further verified." Although he acknowledged a few weak leads, the repeated sightings of the black pickup, statements about a man near the vacant lot, and Whitford's timeline discrepancy, none met the threshold for reopening the case under the regulations of the period. The file was closed again, returned to the metal cabinet, and remained a cold case. From the late 1960s, when a broader backlog review program was implemented more broadly in Charleston, Evelyn Carter's disappearance was pulled for examination once more, this time by a new team of detectives taking over the cold case unit. Among those participating was a retired detective who had worked at the department in the late 1940s and early 1950s and was now brought in as a consultant because he had direct memory of the organizational context when the crime occurred. During this review, he noted that, years earlier, there had been internal suspicion about Thomas Whitford's statement, particularly the timeline of when he left the radio station the night before the disappearance. According to his recollection, a former technician had once mentioned that Whitford might have left the station later than he claimed, but at the time the remark lacked substantiation to be included in the official record, and the technician later transferred, leaving the information as oral lore only. The retired detective documented this detail in a memo to the review team, emphasizing that although it was not evidence, it was something he always felt had never been clarified. When the team cross-checked the memo against the original file, they found it aligned with the timeline inconsistencies about Whitford that the previous review had flagged, though still no new data existed to support it. The team also re-examined documents concerning Whitford's presence near the warehouse area before the disappearance. Although no witness directly placed him there, his admission that he might have driven past a few times was viewed as a weakness, especially given the time of day the victim routinely traveled that route. The retired detective added the observation that Whitford at the time tended to stay at the station longer than work actually required, something colleagues had gossiped about but never formally documented. The review team recorded this and placed it in the suspicion evaluation section, but they could not verify it through station logs because the old duty rosters had been discarded in the late 1950s when the facility changed its record-keeping system. Continuing with the Booker material, the team concluded there was no new data on the man. In the 1960s and 1970s, Booker moved between states doing seasonal labor, but had no serious criminal record that prompted re-interview in similar cases. An old officer who had worked the industrial zone said Booker was not a troublemaker after 1954, causing the team to further downgrade his suspicion level compared to Whitford. Additionally, the team checked whether any later statements about the black pickup had surfaced. None had. State vehicle registration records of the period remained limited and could not be searched by color or bed style, leaving that lead still dead-ended. When assessing physical evidence, the team noted degradation was even worse than in the previous review. The handkerchief had faded to the point it was unclear whether the remaining stain was blood or just discoloration. The women's shoes had cracked soles. The soil samples had turned to fine dust. Paper documents had faded text. Archives reported that some sealed envelopes had needed replacement because the original paper had rotted, but they could not be opened for inspection without destroying evidentiary integrity. This made re-exploitation using 1960s technology completely infeasible. The team produced an end-of-period report stating, "The retired detective's additional note refocuses attention on Whitford, particularly around the independently unverified timeline." However, no new objective data exists to confirm or refute this suspicion. The report concluded that although the note had reference value, it did not meet Charleston's 1965-1980 standard for formal reopening, which required new physical evidence, new statements, or new technical information. The case therefore remained on the cold case list, with Whitford now noted as carrying a higher suspicion level than Booker, but neither could be treated as an official investigative target. Beginning in the early 1980s, when Charleston started digitizing records and standardizing archived data, Evelyn Carter's disappearance was once again placed on the review list, this time with the goal of converting all paper documents to microfilm and then to early digital storage formats. The digitization effort was intended not only to preserve deteriorating old files, but also offered new detectives the chance to re-examine every long-forgotten page. While scanning and coding the file, a young detective in the records digitization unit noticed inconsistencies in the biographical description of Thomas Whitford contained in the original 1945 file. The 1945 record described him as an equipment technician of unremarkable personality, yet during digitization, when cross-referencing old administrative data with later updated state personnel records, the team discovered that Whitford had been named in 2 internal complaints in the late 1940s regarding harassing behavior toward female coworkers. Neither complaint led to discipline due to lack of proof, and because units at the time tended to handle such matters internally, but their existence had never been added to Evelyn Carter's case file. Upon closer inspection, the team found Whitford was also mentioned in a minor radio station report about repeatedly being present in female employees' work areas after hours, claiming he was checking equipment without formal requests. Though the report contained no criminal element, when viewed alongside the timeline discrepancies and his presence near areas linked to the disappearance, it substantially increased his suspicion value. The detective handling digitization noted that between 1943 and 1946, Whitford had been cited in station meeting minutes for bothering a female employee, resolved by moving her to a different shift. When this data was combined with existing file notes that he regularly stayed at the station outside scheduled hours, it painted a far more complete picture of his behavioral pattern, far removed from the original unremarkable impression. Reanalyzing the original timeline, the 1980s review team concluded that Whitford's habit of remaining at the radio station outside normal duty hours, combined with his prior harassment complaints, gave significantly more weight to the hypothesis that he may have been paying unwanted attention to Evelyn. This was especially relevant because Evelyn, as an on-air announcer, had a predictable and observable schedule, a common factor in stalking-type crimes. During digitization, the team also discovered several handwritten 1945 investigator notes about Whitford that had never been incorporated into the official file. Tucked inside the folder cover, these notes recorded that during his initial interview, Whitford appeared unusually tense when asked about his departure time from the station and avoided answering questions about why he was in the warehouse area. Previously regarded as non-conclusive, in the new review these details were judged significant because they matched common avoidance patterns in subjects concealing something. The team concluded that by combining the newly uncovered material, harassment complaints, old internal reports, and the original investigator notes, Whitford emerged as a suspect whose prior behavior fit a stalking offender profile, markedly raising his suspicion level compared to all previous reviews. Nevertheless, the team emphasized that no physical evidence directly linked him. The evidence collected in 1945 had degraded too severely to be examined with 1980s techniques, and witness statements remained insufficient to reconstruct his movements on the night in question. Therefore, despite the substantially increased suspicion value, the team concluded the file still did not meet the criteria for formal criminal reinvestigation. However, they included in the final report a recommendation that in all future reviews Whitford be prioritized for examination, and that his behavioral file be permanently attached to the case file to ensure no related factors were overlooked. The report was appended to the digitized file, marking the first time in more than 3 decades since Evelyn Carter vanished that suspicion toward Whitford was elevated to a noteworthy level. In 2003, when the state of South Carolina launched a program to reevaluate missing persons cases and long-dormant investigations, the Evelyn Carter case, which had been closed for nearly 6 decades, was placed on the priority review list because it was a textbook example of a disappearance with no witnesses, no usable physical evidence, and 2 potential suspects who had never been fully cleared. Authorities formed a dedicated cold case unit that included experienced investigators skilled in behavioral analysis, historical tracing, and the recovery of old records. A 3-person subunit was assigned to handle the case directly: a veteran detective from the Violent Crimes Division, a historical evidence analyst, and a technician trained in restoring degraded documents. They began by retrieving all files that had been digitized in the 1980s and cross-checking them against the original paper records stored in the Central Evidence Warehouse. The reinvestigation plan was structured around 3 main objectives: 1. Reconstruct the entire case timeline using whatever data still existed. 2. Reassess the potential for examining physical evidence with early 21st century forensic techniques. 3. Re-rank the suspects by degree of involvement based on information uncovered in earlier reviews. In the team's first meeting, the behavioral analyst presented a summary showing that Whitford had emerged as the most significant person of interest thanks to material discovered during the 1980s digitization, internal reports about harassment, his habit of showing up at the radio station after hours, and inconsistencies in his 1945 interrogation statements. Booker, by contrast, remained a person of interest, but at a lower level. He had no prior history of harassment or stalking, and although his alibi was weak, his statements contained far fewer contradictions than Whitford's. The reinvestigation plan was set to proceed in 4 stages: recover the remaining physical evidence from storage, assess its condition, and determine whether it was still testable. Mecons, reconstruct movement patterns using 1,945 area maps and compare them with 2003 infrastructure changes. Re-examine the behavior, residences, and civil records of any surviving suspects. Conduct advanced forensic testing on target items. When the technical team opened the evidence box sealed since 1945, they found deterioration far worse than the last description from the 1980s. The woman's shoes were almost split at the soles. The purse was torn at the edges. The soil samples had turned to dry dust, and the metal fragments had rusted into fragile flakes. Only the handkerchief with the dark stained area retained enough structural integrity to be considered for modern testing. Although the stain had faded considerably, the fabric fibers still appeared capable of preserving biological traces, a possibility that early 2000s DNA technology could sometimes exploit even in heavily degraded samples. The evidence analysis team concluded that the handkerchief was the most important item, in fact, possibly the only remaining testable one, for 3 reasons. 1. It was the only item with clear biological markings. 2. It was found at the scene next to the victim's car, suggesting direct relevance to the moment of the incident. 3. Recent advances in DNA technology were beginning to allow analysis of severely degraded samples, albeit with a low success rate. This assessment was entered into the reinvestigation report as the critical starting point. Parallel to the evidence review, the behavioral team rebuilt movement charts for the victim and suspects using original documents, including witness statements, data about the sightings of a dark pickup truck, and the scattered footprints on the vacant lot. Although most traces were no longer testable, the cold case unit treated them as behavioral indicators, especially the overlap between the dark vehicle sightings and the time the victim left home. An internal report from the lead behavioral investigator stated, "If Whitford or anyone connected to him used a vehicle to approach the victim, it could be the dark-colored vehicle described by witnesses." After re-evaluating both suspects, the cold case team agreed that the level of suspicion against Whitford had risen sharply, while Booker remained someone to consider, but was no longer the focus. The primary reasons were the 1980 discoveries of harassment reports and Whitford's unusual presence at the radio station, patterns that frequently matched personal motive attacks from that era. The next phase concentrated on in-depth evidence re-examination, with the handkerchief as the top priority, the only item still capable of yielding biological traces. They assessed feasibility by comparing the sample to 2003-era short tandem repeat (STR) protocols, which could handle degraded DNA provided at least some fragments remained intact. The lab initially warned that success was unlikely because the stain had been oxidized for nearly 60 years, but the cold case team still requested priority testing because even a partial genetic profile could exclude suspects or narrow the investigation. In the first week's wrap-up meeting, the team agreed on 3 strategic goals. 1. DNA test the handkerchief to determine whether the blood belonged to the victim or someone else. 2. Re-examine all of Whitford's personnel files from 1943, 1946 for anything previously missed. 3. Cross-reference lists of drivers, workers, and casual laborers who used dark pickup trucks in the area during the 1940s, using recently digitized vehicle registration records. At the end of the preparatory phase, the cold case unit recorded in the minutes that the blood-stained handkerchief was the key target item and the only remaining link between the crime scene and the possibility of biological tracing with 2003 technology. With that assessment, the Evelyn Carter file, for the first time in nearly 60 years, had a real chance to move beyond decades of deadlock. In early April 2003, the South Carolina State Forensic Lab received the dark-stained handkerchief from the cold case team, beginning what was seen as a potentially case-changing DNA testing phase for a nearly 60-year-old investigation. Forensic technicians first examined the fabric's preservation, noting severe fading but enough integrity to attempt biological extraction. Because the sample was degraded, the lab chose the STR short tandem repeat process with primers designed specifically for degraded DNA, a far more advanced technique than anything available in the 1980s that could identify short repeat segments even when most of the chain had broken down. In the initial stage, technicians carefully washed the fabric with a control solution to remove accumulated dust and oxidation without dissolving any remaining cells. They then cut a small section from the edge of the stain, avoiding the heavily oxidized center. The sample underwent DNA extraction using cell lysis solution and multiple rounds of centrifugation to collect whatever short DNA fragments remained usable. Technicians initially feared the sample was too weak to produce a profile. The electropherogram showed high degradation, but after running a test STR amplification, they detected clear signals at least 7 loci, the minimum needed for an initial identification profile. The first round of results revealed that the DNA recovered was not from a single source. The handkerchief appeared to contain DNA from 2 individuals. One set of signals matched common female genetic patterns, very likely the victim's, while the remainder showed the distinctive Y chromosome pattern of a male. For the first time in nearly 60 years, the case had direct biological evidence linking a male individual to the scene. The forensic team immediately separated the signals using digital filtering and increased sensitivity for male genome STR segments. After 3 rounds of analysis, they obtained a male STR profile with 8 loci meeting comparison standards. When the cold case team learned the handkerchief contained male DNA, they immediately sent reference samples for Whitford and Booker, obtained from civil databases and supplemental medical records, to the lab for comparison. Whitford's sample was collected under an expanded civil order program for persons connected to unsolved cases. Booker's came from old medical files since he had died years earlier. The first comparison round with Booker's sample showed no match, biologically eliminating him as a suspect. However, when compared with Whitford's STR profile, technicians recorded a high match at all 8 loci, far exceeding random match probability and meeting 2003 forensic identification standards. The forensic report stated, "The male DNA recovered from the handkerchief is consistent with the reference sample of Thomas Whitford, with a random match probability in the population of less than 1 in 8 million. This was considered the biggest breakthrough since the case opened in 1945. The lab double-checked by rerunning the analysis with a different primer set to rule out contamination, and the match remained at the same level. The handkerchief, long thought useless, had become the direct link between Whitford and the location where Evelyn's car was found. When the official DNA report was handed to the cold case team, the entire direction of the investigation shifted instantly. The behavioral investigators saw it as confirmation of the personal motive theory the team had built from internal reports and Whitford's radio station behavior. The evidence analysis group argued that because the handkerchief was found only a few feet from the victim's car and was not listed among Evelyn's personal belongings, it most likely fell from whoever approached her at the time of the incident. That fit the scene's drag marks and scattered items without signs of a major struggle inside the car, a detail that had puzzled the original 1945 investigators. With the DNA result, the cold case team reconstructed the hypothesis that Whitford was present at the location where the victim's car was discovered and had at least come into direct contact with an item at the scene at the moment of her disappearance. They also re-examined the original timeline, noting that the contradictory period in Whitford's statement, from when he left the radio station until he claimed to be home, exactly matched the estimated window of the attack. The cold case team wrote in an internal report, "For the first time in 60 years, the file contains biological evidence capable of directly linking a suspect to the crime scene." Although the team remained cautious in its conclusions, they stated that the DNA result far exceeded previous levels of suspicion and was sufficient to be considered an investigative breakthrough. The DNA evidence from the handkerchief became the most important foundation, shifting the case for the first time since 1945 from a long cold status to active investigation. Immediately after receiving the DNA report confirming that the 1945 crime scene handkerchief sample matched Thomas Whitford's genetic profile, the cold case team began a full reanalysis of his file, combining 3 data axes, DNA, timeline, and behavior, to determine the degree of involvement and to eliminate other suspects. First, they rebuilt the event diagram using 1945 original records, the time Evelyn left home, the time witnesses heard an unusual engine, and the time the car was found all fell within Whitford's unaccounted-for window. His inability to provide witnesses confirming he was home during that period had always been a weakness, but placed alongside the DNA result, that gap now became pivotal. The analysis team continued by comparing Whitford's behavioral pattern from the 1980 says digitized archives, internal harassment reports, after-hours presence at the station, and attempts to approach female employees with the case circumstances. Those reports, previously treated only as background, now supported the theory that Whitford may have been obsessively interested in Evelyn, who appeared daily at the station on a fixed schedule, making her an easy target to watch and follow. The behavioral unit created a victim approach model chart, noting overlaps between Evelyn's commute route and times Whitford was seen or recorded near the warehouse area and vacant lot. When combined with the DNA data, the team concluded that Whitford's presence at the scene was no longer speculation, but biologically supported. Meanwhile, the evidence team re-examined all factors related to other suspects, especially Booker, to assess exclusion. The handkerchief DNA did not match Booker, and his behavioral history showed no pattern of stalking or personal motive. Vague witness statements about a man near the lot at dawn were re-evaluated, and investigators concluded that apart from a general physical description, which lacked precision, nothing tied Booker to the scene or evidence. The initial timing coincidence in his statement was deemed insufficient without further corroboration that he was near the victim's route at the exact moment. Thus, while Booker could not be theoretically ruled out 100%, his likelihood of involvement dropped to the lowest level. The team also revisited the clue of the dark pickup truck seen multiple days near the lot. Although the vehicle could be relevant, the DNA showed the person closest to the evidence was Whitford. Therefore, if the truck was connected, it most likely belonged to or was driven by someone associated with him. No other listed suspect had a history of owning or using a similar vehicle, making the theory that it belonged to Booker or a stranger far less convincing. When re-examining Whitford's 1945 statements, investigators noted contradictions between his claim of going straight home after leaving the station and a witness report of an engine starting near his residence close to dawn, a time that matched the estimated attack window. Whitford's earlier change in story about being near the warehouse area, first denying, then admitting he might have been there, became a clear behavioral indicator of evasion when viewed alongside the DNA. The behavioral unit assessed this as a common defensive response pattern when a suspect knows he is involved but tries to avoid details that could be cross-checked. In the comprehensive analysis meeting, the cold case team created a table comparing 12 suspicion criteria: motive, opportunity, location, behavior, timing, statement inconsistencies, degree of access to the victim, crime scene traces, vehicle data, personal relationship, pre- and post-event behavior, and forensic factors. Whitford matched 10 of the 12, Booker matched only 3. Other potential suspects briefly mentioned in 1945, but dropped early, were rechecked against 2003 civil databases, and none had geographic ties, statements, or behavioral traits sufficient to remain on the list. This elimination process was explicitly recorded in the report. No individual other than Thomas Whitford simultaneously satisfies the necessary conditions to remain a viable suspect. The technical team wrote in its evidence assessment, the DNA requires the entire file to be re-evaluated under a single suspect paradigm. The behavioral team wrote, internal harassment reports reinforce the personal motive hypothesis. The timeline team wrote, Whitford's unverifiable time window aligns perfectly with the victim's disappearance period. When all data streams were merged, they pointed to one conclusion: Whitford must be treated as the central suspect in the reinvestigation. The final report of the evaluation phase was sent to Cold Case Command, stating that not only had the level of suspicion risen, but the factors excluding other suspects had been strengthened to the point that only one person fit the entire structure of this nearly 60-year-old case. The Cold Case team, after designating Whitford as the central suspect based on DNA evidence and profile analysis, moved on to collecting additional witness statements from surviving individuals to strengthen the behavioral picture and reconstruct the complete chain of events from 1945. Although many original witnesses had passed away over time, several people who had lived or worked near the route the victim traveled were still alive in 2003 and could provide previously untapped information. The team began with two elderly residents who had lived in the boarding house near where Evelyn resided. The first, an elderly woman who had lived on the floor below, remembered that in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, she had seen a man several times standing near the street corner, watching the boarding house early in the morning. She could not identify who it was, but when shown a 1940s-era photograph of Whitford, she said he looked similar in build to that man. This was not a direct identification, but since she had never been specifically asked about this man in 1945, her statement was added to the file as supporting behavioral evidence. Another witness, a former employee of the grocery store near the industrial area, stated that he remembered seeing Evelyn in a brief argument with a man right outside the store a few weeks before she vanished. He did not hear the content, but recalled that the man said something that clearly upset her, and she left quickly. When asked about the man's appearance, he described him as average height, stocky build, and wearing a dark jacket, consistent with known descriptions of Whitford at the time. He added that because workers frequently passed through the area, he did not think it was a serious conflict. However, when combined with the documented harassment pattern and Whitford's tendency to approach outside regular hours, the investigative team considered this noteworthy data that reinforced the likelihood the victim had experienced an uncomfortable encounter with him. Another witness, who had worked at the radio station in the 1940s and was located in a nursing home, despite diminished memory, still recalled that Evelyn had confided that a male colleague followed her more than necessary and had even appeared in the parking lot once when she finished her shift. The witness could not remember the name, but when presented with an old staff roster, she pointed to Whitford's name and said he always found reasons to be around Evelyn. She also stated Evelyn had said she felt uncomfortable and was considering changing shifts, but had not filed a formal complaint for fear of creating internal conflict. These details, when cross-referenced with the digitized harassment reports, further strengthened the hypothesis of a personal motive on Whitford's part. The cold case team continued by interviewing a witness who had worked at the warehouse near the vacant lot. This individual reported seeing Whitford twice in the month before the crime, standing near the lot watching vehicles coming and going. At the time, he thought Whitford was looking for someone or asking directions, but now, knowing the case details, he believed there was something unusual about the way he was watching. Though this statement did not prove criminal conduct, it increased the consistency of the pre-offense stalking pattern. When the interviews were expanded to the broader community, the team located a resident who had lived near the stretch of road where the black pickup had been sighted. This person remembered hearing a man's voice arguing loudly near a pickup truck in the pre-dawn hours in the days before the disappearance. When asked if he knew who it was, he said he wasn't certain, but the voice had the same tone as someone who used to work at the radio station, a remarkably coincidental description. Although it could not be confirmed as Whitford, the statement was recorded because it fit the timeline and possible stalking behavior. The team also located a surviving former co-worker of Booker. This individual confirmed that Booker usually worked alone and had little interaction with female employees, adding that Booker never showed any special interest in anyone. This indirectly helped further eliminate Booker from the personal motive model, a factor that did not align with the prominent behavioral data in Whitford's file. Once all the new statements were entered into the case file, the Behavioral Analysis Unit created a new comparative chart of both suspects across the criteria of motive, opportunity, pre-event behavior, and degree of access to the victim. The fresh witness testimony significantly raised Whitford's score in 3 categories: pre-offense access to the victim, ability to track her movements, and the possibility of prior conflict between them. At the same time, the new statements added no supporting elements for Booker, pushing his profile even further from the center of suspicion. The team's final report clearly stated, the additional statements from living witnesses do not constitute direct legal proof, but they complete Whitford's behavioral model and provide strong support for the likelihood that he had conflict-causing interaction with the victim prior to her disappearance. The cold case team regarded this as a pivotal phase because for the first time since 1945, they possessed a post-1945 chain of testimony capable of linking motive behavior, DNA, in a single coherent structure. All new information was added to the master file, marking a major step forward in reconstructing the context of the crime in the period immediately before Evelyn Carter vanished. After solidifying the behavioral model and witness statements, the cold case team turned to tracing the black pickup that had been seen multiple days around the vacant lot in 1945. A lead that had been left unresolved in earlier investigations due to the limited vehicle registration data available at the time. With newly digitized and cross-referenced DMV records from multiple counties, the team decided to run a complete search of all light truck registrations in Charleston and surrounding counties from 1938 to 1947, focusing on short bed vehicles in dark colors, characteristics that matched witness descriptions. Although 1940s DMV records contained only basic information, owner name, year, and vehicle type, many had been scanned and preserved in state archives, enabling period-specific tracing. The team started by compiling a list of every black or dark-colored pickup registered during that window. The number was not large, as pre-war Charleston had relatively few privately owned trucks. After initial screening, 23 vehicles remained. The team then cross-checked the owners against civil, census, and employment records to eliminate those with no connection to the radio station or industrial area. In the first round, 18 owners were excluded, most because they lived far away or used the vehicle for farming and had no reason to be near the vacant lot in the early morning hours. The remaining 5 vehicles were traced through transfer history. One immediately stood out, a 1940 Ford pickup, black, registered to Thomas Whitford from 1943-1945. This had not appeared in the original investigation because Whitford never admitted owning a vehicle, and local investigators in 1945 had not queried the DMV. When the cold case team examined the transfer records, they discovered the pickup had been sold in August 1945, only 6 weeks after Evelyn Carter disappeared. The old DMV record noted, title transferred at private residence, not through a dealer, meaning it was a private sale with no commercial receipt, which explains why it had been missed in prior searches. The subsequent owner had passed away, but family members still had a blurry late 1940s photograph of the truck. When the overall shape, short bed, dark cabin, old-style fenders, was compared to 1945 witness descriptions of the vehicle seen near the vacant lot, the cold case team concluded it was a very close match. Another detail heightened suspicion. A small garage's 1946 repair record showed the same pickup had been completely repainted dark gray just 1 year after the sale. Repainting a vehicle so soon after a quick sale, especially so close to the crime timeline, was deemed highly unusual by the analysis unit, particularly in the context of common concealment patterns seen in reinvestigated cold cases. The team continued tracing by checking local records from Whitford's 1945 neighborhood. One surviving neighbor confirmed remembering him driving a dark-colored truck during that period, though he couldn't recall the exact model. When shown the DMV photograph of the pickup, the neighbor said it looked very much like Whitford's truck. Though not an absolute identification, it served as another supporting piece. Next, the team examined the purchase and sale dates. DMV records showed Whitford acquired the truck in 1943. The same year, he began working flexible shifts at the radio station, the period when multiple staff notes documented him appearing at the facility outside his scheduled hours. Selling the truck in the immediate post-crime window was evaluated by the team as potential evidence removal behavior, especially since the ownership period exactly overlapped the documented internal harassment incidents. When all the data points were combined, matching DNA, Whitford's unverified alibi timeline, documented harassment and stalking of the victim, new witness accounts of pre-crime conflict, and now the black pickup proven to be Whitford's and sold immediately after the crime. The cold case team concluded that the suspect vehicle had been clearly identified and directly linked to the primary suspect. The internal report stated, DMV tracing confirms the black pickup was not a peripheral element, but a central component in reconstructing the suspect's movements. The timing of the sale is a critical factor that elevates Whitford's involvement to the highest level. This information was added to the supplemental file, marking the first time since 1945 that the vehicle lead had been authenticated and tightly linked to the main suspect. Based on all evidence collected from 1945 through 2003, including Whitford's behavioral profile, the victim's travel route, locations where the black pickup was sighted, and 1940s Charleston topography, the cold case team moved to the critical phase of reconstructing probable body disposal, according to criminological models. Drawing on records of similar era cases in the southeastern U.S., particularly those involving stalking or personal obsession, offenders typically chose visually isolated locations with wet, low-lying terrain or heavy vegetation to conceal remains for decades. When the team re-examined 1945 maps and compared them with 2003 satellite imagery, they noted that the Johns Island marsh area, close to Charleston, and sparsely traveled in the 1940s, lay directly on a pickup-accessible axis from the vacant lot, without passing through populated roads. The area was wetland with natural depressions, ideal for an offender needing a quick, discreet site, unlikely to be discovered. A 1940s document showed the dirt track leading to the marsh edge had once been used by farm workers, but was abandoned during the war, making it a perfect location to hide a body without deep digging. The cold case team placed Johns Island on the target list and decided to deploy ground-penetrating radar GPR for subsurface survey, a technology unavailable in the original investigation, but mature enough by 2003 to locate decades-old remains in wet conditions. The GPR survey was conducted on a morning in early June 2003, with geologists, forensic experts, and a search team present. The equipment was dragged along slightly elevated strips above the waterline, where geology suggested shallow buried objects or sediment-covered remains were most likely to be preserved. After nearly 2 hours with no significant returns, the GPR detected an anomalous reflective mass approximately 60-70 centimeters below the surface, an elongated, slightly curved object consistent in size with an adult human body. The location was roughly 40 meters from the old dirt track, far enough to avoid casual notice, yet quickly reachable by pickup. The forensic team marked the site and began careful hand excavation to preserve any structure. As the topsoil was removed, they encountered traces of decomposed organic material. On the second layer, small bone fragments appeared, and by the third layer, a human skull emerged, covered in the distinctive red clay of Johns Island, but sufficiently intact for identification. Discovery of the remains was immediately reported to command, and the area was sealed as a fresh crime scene. The forensic team recovered all bone fragments, sifted soil for associated evidence, and transported the remains to the state lab. Initial examination confirmed female remains with time since death, estimated at over 50 years, consistent with Evelyn Carter's 1945 disappearance. Because the body was skeletonized, identification relied on dental DNA from pulp cavity and surviving tooth structure. Marrow DNA was extracted using techniques specialized for heavily degraded bone. Comparison with the Carter family reference profile produced a statistical match at the highest level accepted in 2003. The report concluded the remains recovered on Johns Island belonged to Evelyn Carter, missing since 1945. For the first time in 58 years, the victim's location had been established. Further examination revealed multiple perimortem injuries, several ribs and arm bones showed bending and compression fractures, indicating significant force before death. Notably, the ulna displayed torsional damage, typical of manual restraint. This matched Whitford's suspected attack pattern: approach from behind, rapid control, and dragging the victim into a vehicle. Additionally, The mandible had a small crack consistent with impact against a hard surface, supporting the theory the victim was pulled or pushed near the vehicle. Although exact cause of death could not be determined due to complete soft tissue loss, the forensic team concluded that the antemortem injuries demonstrate clear violent assault, consistent with rapid control intent by an individual. A rotted fabric fragment found near the remains had a barely visible pattern, but analysis determined it was 1940s era men's jacket lining, possibly torn from the perpetrator's clothing during a struggle. Though too degraded for sourcing, it matched descriptions of Whitford's outdoor work attire from 2003 witness interviews. When all traces, injuries, burial location, logical route from the vacant lot, criminological model, and confirmatory victim DNA were combined, the cold case team concluded that the Johns Island discovery not only answered the six-decade question of Evelyn Carter's fate, but provided the strongest forensic and evidentiary foundation to date, linking the violent act to the central suspect, Thomas Whitford. With the body recovered on Johns Island and the entire investigative file strengthened, the cold case team entered the phase of crime scene and movement reconstruction, an essential step to test the plausibility that Whitford abducted, assaulted, and disposed of the victim. The team began by reanalyzing 1945 terrain, using archived maps, World War II aerial photos, and long-abandoned dirt roads no longer on modern systems. The topography showed the vacant lot where Evelyn's car was found sat at an intersection between the industrial zone and a southern trail, perfect for a pickup driver to leave unnoticed. The analyst rebuilt the timeline from when Evelyn left home until witnesses heard an engine start, cross-referenced against the unverified gap in Whitford's 1945 statement. Calculations showed the drive from the vacant lot to the Johns Island marsh took 27 minutes on 1940s dirt roads, fitting the window in which an offender could subdue the victim, leave the scene, and reach the disposal site before full daylight. Behavioral disposal analysis indicated the offender likely needed a familiar, discreet, easily accessible location. Newly obtained statements revealed Whitford had briefly worked at a farm facility near Johns Island in the early 1940s, explaining his probable knowledge of the marsh terrain. The team then ran route simulations using software that incorporated 1945 topography, average 1940 pickup speed, and natural stopping points. Results showed that if Whitford left the vacant lot immediately after subduing Evelyn, he could reach Johns Island in the correct time frame, dispose of the body in 10-15 minutes, and return home before neighbors noticed his absence. The route avoided patrols in populated areas. Continuing the reconstruction, analysts noted the skeletal injuries, bending fractures, torsion, blunt trauma, aligned with the victim being dragged into a pickup bed. Comparing injury mechanics to the bed height of a 1940 Ford pickup, the forensic expert confirmed the damage pattern matched being lifted, pushed, or pulled over the low tailgate. GPR data from Johns Island also showed soil compression, typical of a 120 pounds object placed on the ground and lightly covered, matching an adult body and rapid burial technique. The team concluded the offender did not dig a deep grave, but simply used existing mud and sediment, a method common among perpetrators needing to leave quickly. The team tested whether another suspect could have followed the same route. Booker was ruled out due to lack of suitable vehicle, no familiarity with Johns Island, and no DNA match. Peripheral suspects were eliminated for lack of presence in the vacant lot area or access to the victim. When Whitford's route was modeled, it aligned almost perfectly with known behavioral data, habit of appearing near the victim's workplace, ownership of the black pickup during the exact period, timeline gaps, and prior work history near Johns Island. The completed reconstruction sequence was Whitford waits for Evelyn to leave home in the pre-dawn hours, approaches her at the vacant lot, subdues her manually, producing the injuries found on the bones, loads her into the pickup bed, leaves via quiet dirt roads, drives to Johns Island, buries the body shallowly in marsh sediment, returns home before detection. When the full model was presented, the analysis unit concluded no alternative route fit the existing data, and Whitford's was the most logical in terms of time, terrain, and behavior. The reconstruction report stated, route, timing, vehicle behavior, and disposal location are all consistent with Whitford having committed the offense. No other model satisfies every condition. For the first time since the crime, the scene, behavior, and route had been reassembled into a complete, coherent structure tightly linked to the central suspect. The cold case team, after perfecting a crime scene reconstruction model and a travel route that matched Whitford's data almost perfectly, decided to conduct a second interrogation, the first time since 1945 that he would face the full array of new evidence: DNA, the vehicle, the body, and a scientifically reconstructed timeline. The interrogation took place in Charleston in late July 2003, attended by 2 veteran detectives, a behavioral analyst, and a representative from the prosecutor's office. Whitford, now 80 years old, was invited under the pretext of updating an old file. But the moment he sat down, the team made it clear this was no longer a routine conversation. The detective placed in front of him the photograph of the handkerchief found next to the victim's car and the 2003 DNA report. When informed that the male DNA sample on the handkerchief matched his own DNA at 8 str loci, with a probability far exceeding the threshold for positive identification, Whitford initially reacted by denying it, saying there must be some mistake. However, the investigators revealed that the comparison sample had been lawfully obtained through a civil subpoena and explained that the level of match could not be random. When Whitford fell silent, the detectives moved on to the vehicle evidence. They presented digitized DMV records proving he owned a black 1940 Ford pickup between 1943 and 1945, something he had never previously disclosed. When asked why he had concealed this information during the 1945 interview, Whitford said he didn't think the truck was relevant and didn't remember the details. The team then revealed that the pickup had been sold in August 1945, just 6 weeks after the disappearance, and that 1946 garage records showed the vehicle had been repainted. Under the pressure of this continuous chain of facts, Whitford began to shift his story, admitting that he might have driven near the area where the victim worked on a few mornings, but insisting he didn't remember that specific day. The behavioral analyst immediately noted this as a typical psychological shift of someone trying to minimize involvement by admitting partial truths while avoiding critical details. Next, the investigators presented a map simulating the route from the crime scene to Johns Island, explaining how ground-penetrating radar had located Evelyn's remains. When photographs of the burial site were placed in front of him, Whitford looked away and his hands trembled slightly. He said, "I never went to Johns Island that night," but this denial contradicted his earlier 1945 statement that he didn't recall whether he had driven through the areas around Charleston that evening. The team continued matching the timeline: the time Evelyn left home, the time witnesses heard an engine, and the gap in Whitford's alibi from leaving the radio station until arriving home. When asked to explain why no one could confirm he was home during the window that overlapped with the victim's disappearance, Whitford vaguely replied that he usually didn't see anyone that early in the morning. The detective asked directly, "Can you prove you weren't at the wasteland at that time?" Whitford did not answer. When questioned about internal radio station reports concerning his stalking of female employees, he became defensive, claiming it was just a misunderstanding because I was friendly. However, new 2003 statements from surviving witnesses, including Evelyn's discomfort with his approaches, were presented for comparison. Under the relentless flow of information, Whitford began showing signs of wavering. He admitted he might have spoken with Evelyn in the weeks before the incident, but denied any conflict. When the investigators presented a witness statement placing him near the wasteland the morning before the crime, he changed his story again, saying he might have been looking for parts or out walking to clear his head. The behavioral analyst identified this as classic avoidance, creating unverifiable excuses to dilute the chain of events. The turning point of the interrogation came when the investigators presented the forensic conclusion about perimortem injuries on the victim's bones that matched a manual restraint pattern consistent with the physical build and approach pattern of a younger Whitford. When asked to explain why his DNA was at the scene, his vehicle matched witness descriptions, his timeline aligned with the disappearance, and the simulated route led directly to the burial location, Whitford said, "I don't know. I don't remember. It was too long ago." This was the first time he did not outright deny involvement, instead shifting to passive defensiveness, a psychological indicator that a suspect recognizes the evidence is too strong for complete denial. At the end of the more than 3-hour interrogation, the cold case team noted in the report, Whitford changed his statement multiple times, each time adjusting to the information presented. The level of denial weakened when confronted with the DNA evidence and disposal model. No reasonable explanation was offered to sever the connection between Whitford and the crime scene. This report was immediately forwarded to the Charleston County Solicitor's Office, along with the full DNA analysis, DMV data, reconstructed timeline, and body recovery records. Preparations to formally present the case to the prosecutor began, opening the legal phase of the case after nearly 6 decades. After completing the file and submitting the second interrogation transcript, along with the entire new chain of evidence, to the Charleston Solicitor's Office, the chief prosecutor decided to present the case to a grand jury for indictment of Thomas Whitford on a charge of first-degree murder in the 1945 death of Evelyn Carter. The summary submitted to the grand jury consisted of 4 key components: the DNA match between Whitford and the handkerchief recovered at the scene, vehicle tracing evidence confirming Whitford owned a black pickup, matching witness descriptions, and that he sold the truck during the exact post-crime window. The recovery of remains on Johns Island with peri-mortem injuries consistent with manual assault, and the reconstructed timeline showing an unaccounted-for period in Whitford's statement that coincided with the victim's disappearance. After 2 hearings in August 2003, the grand jury unanimously voted to indict. An arrest warrant was signed the same day, marking the transition of the case from investigation to criminal prosecution after nearly 6 decades. Charleston police, assisted by federal marshals, executed the warrant early the next morning. Whitford, now living in a quiet Charleston suburb, was taken into custody without resistance, though visibly surprised. As the warrant was read aloud, he remained silent, except for one recorded question. "Has it really come to this?" A statement noted in the report, but carrying no legal weight. He was transported to the Charleston County Detention Center to await his initial appearance. At the preliminary hearing, the prosecution outlined the grounds for the charges, while defense counsel requested release on bail, citing the defendant's age and health, but the judge denied it, ruling that the severity of the offense and the new evidence required continued detention. The full trial was scheduled for November 2003. The trial attracted significant attention as one of South Carolina's oldest cold cases to be prosecuted using modern DNA evidence. When the trial opened, the prosecution presented a comprehensive diagram of the entire evidentiary chain, beginning with the 1945 crime scene, Evelyn's abandoned car near the wasteland, scattered belongings, drag marks, and the dark-stained handkerchief, the central piece of evidence. The jury was shown crime scene photos and heard how every forensic attempt at the time had failed due to technological limitations, causing the case to go cold for decades. The prosecution then presented the 2003 STR analysis results, an 8-locus match between the DNA on the handkerchief and Whitford's, with an astronomically low probability of random coincidence. A forensic expert testified, affirming there was no possibility of error or contamination. Next, the prosecution introduced old DMV records showing Whitford owned a black 1940 Ford pickup and sold it just 6 weeks after Evelyn's disappearance, emphasizing the timing and the post-crime vehicle change as consciousness of guilt behavior. An archivist testified that the truck was repainted shortly thereafter, further raising suspicions of evidence tampering. The prosecution continued with the discovery of remains on Johns Island. describing the GPR process, excavation, and dental DNA confirmation that the body was Evelyn Carter's. A second forensic expert detailed the skeletal trauma, spiral fractures, bending fractures, and mandibular cracks, stating these were consistent with manual restraint and dragging, matching the attack pattern of someone with Whitford's 1945 physique. The prosecution also presented the reconstructed route from the wasteland to Johns Island via old dirt roads, with travel time fitting perfectly into Whitford's unaccounted-for window. A simulated map was projected for the jury, illustrating the logical sequence of approach, transport, and disposal. The behavioral portion followed. Internal radio station reports of Whitford harassing or stalking female employees, new 2003 witness statements about Evelyn's discomfort around him, and another witness placing him near the wasteland shortly before the crime. The prosecution stressed that this pattern not only established motive, but aligned with opportunistic targeting and control, typical of similar-era assaults. Finally, the prosecution read excerpts from the second interrogation transcript, highlighting Whitford's multiple statement changes, from denying ownership of the pickup to admitting he might have been nearby, then refusing to fully rule out being at the scene. The prosecutor closed the presentation by saying, "No single piece of evidence standing alone is conclusive, but together they form a logical, consistent chain with no escape. All roads lead to Thomas Whitford." At that point, the defense was invited to respond. They argued the evidence was too old, that degraded DNA could not be fully trusted, and that Whitford's lack of memory about events from decades earlier could not be taken as consciousness of guilt. The prosecution rebutted by reiterating the absolute convergence of multiple independent layers of evidence: biological, physical, geographic, behavioral, and temporal. As the trial moved to jury deliberation, the panel spent more than 7 hours reviewing the DNA, vehicle tracing, route reconstruction, skeletal trauma, witness statements, and Whitford's inconsistent statements before returning the next morning with a unanimous verdict: Thomas Whitford guilty of first-degree murder in the 1945 death of Evelyn Carter. The judge read the sentence in open court, emphasizing that although the crime occurred nearly 60 years earlier, modern forensic science combined with historical investigative records had created an airtight chain of reasoning that excluded all other suspects and confirmed Whitford as the person who approached, subdued, and caused the victim's death. The sentence imposed was life imprisonment without parole, commensurate with the extreme gravity of the offense and the decades-long concealment of the body that inflicted prolonged suffering on the victim's family and obstructed justice. When offered the opportunity to speak, Whitford remained silent, staring at the table, offering neither apology nor denial. Defense counsel announced intent to appeal, but the judge noted the sentence was effective immediately, and the defendant was transferred to a medium-security facility to begin serving his term. Outside the courtroom, Evelyn Carter's family, consisting of 2 grandchildren of her brother and a cousin, for the first time in nearly 60 years, received official notification of a conviction related to their missing relative. They stated that although time had faded many memories, learning the truth and recovering Evelyn's remains for proper burial was something they had never dared hope for. Following the trial, Evelyn's remains were released to the family in accordance with forensic protocols, accompanied by the dental DNA identification report and all non-biological evidence recovered from Johns Island. The family held a small funeral service in Charleston, finally laying Evelyn to rest and marking the end of a search for truth that had lasted more than half a century. Members of the cold case unit attended as observers, and a police department representative stated that uncovering the truth, however late, remains the duty of every generation of investigators. After the burial, the case file was transferred to state archives marked closed, solved, with an appendix detailing the entire investigative process from 1945 to 2003. Remaining physical evidence was sealed in new preservation boxes, clearly labeled with the case number and closure date for historical purposes. The final summary report emphasized that this was one of South Carolina's oldest cold cases solved, through the combination of modern DNA technology and traditional file review, demonstrating the enduring value of preserved evidence, even when degraded, and the importance of maintaining comprehensive archives across generations. With the court's verdict and the family's burial of Evelyn, the Evelyn Carter case, once a lingering trauma for the Charleston community, officially closed after 58 years. The story of the Evelyn Carter case is not only a 58-year pursuit of truth, but also reflects issues that remain relevant in American society today, from personal safety and trust in the justice system to the importance of technology in protecting communities. First, Evelyn's disappearance on her way to work at dawn highlights the risks faced by people with predictable, solitary schedules. Today, millions of Americans still travel alone in the early morning or late at night, and this story serves as a reminder that varying routines, sharing schedules with loved ones, or using personal safety apps can significantly reduce risk. The fact that Whitford had a history of harassing behavior that was not properly addressed reflects a familiar reality. Many assaults begin with minor boundary violations that are overlooked. In modern workplaces, a culture of early reporting and serious handling of harassment not only protects individuals but can prevent dangerous escalation. The case also demonstrates the power of technology, particularly DNA and digitization, in bringing criminals to justice. The handkerchief with DNA matching Whitford proves that preserving evidence and updating forensic capabilities can completely alter a case's outcome. It is a reminder to today's law enforcement agencies of the critical importance of investing in technology and long-term data management. Finally, the journey of Evelyn's family, persistently waiting and cooperating with investigators, shows the power of perseverance and the role of community in keeping pressure on so that justice is never forgotten. In a nation like the United States, where thousands of missing persons cases remain unsolved, this story underscores our shared responsibility to keep searching, to keep asking questions, and never to accept silence in the face of a person's disappearance. Thank you for joining us on this journey to close one of America's longest-running cold cases. If this story moved you, please subscribe to continue supporting us. See you in the next video, where we'll keep uncovering buried truths that justice is still waiting to name.